it going? I hope that you can hear me properly. There's a chat there that you should be able to type in. So why don't you type in to confirm that you can hear me? Sorry about this. This is the first time I'm using the software. So, we'll take a minute to make sure that everybody can sign on. Great. Everybody can hear me properly. That's fantastic. Yes, it's very cool that we have a chat. Fantastic, fantastic. I'm going to take a little bit of time before I get started with the presentation. This is the first time I'm using the software. It's by a company called Demio. I'd never used them before. I tried them out a couple of days ago and they seemed all right. I did like a very impromptu webinar and just posted if anybody wanted to join, and yeah, we shot the shit for about 45 minutes about nothing in particular. I just wanted to make sure that the software works. The reason I dropped out of GoToWebinar was for two reasons. Number one, the cost was $250 a month to have the webinar, which I don't mind because I mean it's it's the cost of doing business, I suppose. It's no big deal. But they all of a sudden they got like hinky with my payment. I had a credit card on their account, on the account there, and it got like kind of like hinky, like it didn't want to accept it, and I tried to do it, and all of a sudden, because of this snafu, I started thinking to myself, hey, do I really want to be blowing $250 a month? Actually, it was more. It was $250 plus 20% value-added tax. So it was actually closer to $300 a month for the service. And so I started looking at other services, and all of a sudden I came across this one. First, I came across an outfit called Webinar Ninja. I basically just Googled, what's the best webinar platform? And Webinar Ninja was at the top, and I tried them out, and it was garbage. It was garbage because it was so unintuitive. I don't know how to get it to work on a cell phone, Ian. So sorry to say. Yeah, it was, anyway, the Webinar Ninja was so unintuitive and so annoying. I spent like 45 minutes trying to figure out how to fucking start a goddamn webinar. And finally, I was just like, enough of this bullshit. And so I canceled my membership on Webinar Ninja. I'd actually put in my credit card and everything, but it was just so frustrating that I just canceled it and went to the next one on the list, which was Demio. And Demio seemed all right. And so here we are on this new platform. Yeah, so we've got 35 attendees, and I'm looking at my thing here. There are 44 people registered. It's a good and healthy number. So yeah, first time you heard of a ninja failing? Yeah, well, yeah, lots of people call themselves something ninja, and I'm always now I'm sort of suspicious of it. So anyway, let's get cracking. I'm going to be talking about a theory of morality, which sounds kind of snowy. Let's put it that way. Like it's like, actually, before I get going, I want to try out a feature that it has, and I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to bring a couple of people online just to say hi. Who wants to be online, the sound and video? Tell me in the chat and I'll hit you up. Okay, let me try. Yeah. Hello, Russell, are you there? Hello, Russell, are you there? And I'm turning on my webcam. There we are. As you can see, it's the real CRP, not just a voice synthesizer. And I don't see Russell. Okay. And by the way, I'm not going to be putting my image for the whole presentation.
Hey, Coach, how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Awesome. Another awesome Sunday, and I get to hear your webinar.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, let me get somebody else in here because it's kind of like a cool thing here. Where's Mattis? Mattis, where are you? Mattis. Oh, there you are, Mattis. I'll pull you in too, because why not? Yeah, this is just shooting the shit before I get started because this is a new platform and I want people to, you know, I want to try it out first and see how it goes. Mattis, are you there? I let me see. What's this button? Okay, I'm trying out different things. You know, look, I'm my own producer. This kind of like, it's kind of like shitty, so you're just gonna have to forgive me. Mattis, are you there? Yeah. Oh, that's. I guess Mattis doesn't have webcam on or microphone. Huh. Okay. Yeah, Russell, how's it going? Good to see you. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's great to see you. Look, I'm gonna, I'm gonna. Now that you're on, say hi to everybody before I kick you out.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
Yeah, and I'm gonna kick you out now. You know, like, well, we'll talk later at the end of the presentation. But I just wanted to try out that thing there to see how it works. And Mattis, I'm going to, yeah, I'm just allowing you. I'm just trying this out, okay? And I know it's a little bit annoying, and I'm going to blink off here because you don't really need to see me doing this. Before we get started, there is a handout thing that I want you to get. I'm sharing it right now. I don't know where you get it, but it should appear like download. Oh, great. You guys are all downloading it. That's the entire presentation. Now, the reason I'm putting it as a handout is, number one, so that you can have something that you can peruse, because there are multiple slides in this presentation. And number one. And number two, you can check it out later at your leisure and read it. Number three, I'm unsure about the quality, the image quality of this webinar. You know, when I did the previous test webinar that I did a couple of days ago, that was just a really impromptu thing. I later checked the video and the image quality was not the best, to tell you the truth. And it was actually kind of hard to read any text that appeared on screen. And so I'm a bit worried about that. And so I figured I'll just give you a handout so that you can have it and yeah, read it at your leisure, follow along as I go along, you know, yeah, because I don't really worry about the whole, you know, spoiling thing. You know, it's stuff to consider. And so anyway, let's get cracking. Now, let me give you a little background as to why I've been developing this theory of morality. It seems to me that there are a lot of interesting things going on in evolutionary psychology on the one hand. And on the other hand, on a personal level, I've always wondered why it is that certain redistributive ideologies periodically emerge. I'm talking basically socialism. Why does it constantly come up relentlessly? It's been happening since the 18th century. And before that, you could argue that even during the Middle Ages, there were various redistributive and resentful ideologies that periodically emerged. They were mostly confined to the Catholic Church, but they emerged periodically, and they had to be stamped out by the church because a lot of them just went overboard. And so I was like wondering, is, you know, where does this come from? Why is it that it consistently happens? And I also been reading about moral theory, and I was always unconvinced by the various moral theories. Like, for instance, John Rawls' theory that he sort of like had what was just and what was moral, and it was sort of like a distinction without a difference. And it just seemed like all kinds of mental gymnastics that failed to account for historical development. Because a lot of moral theories that I studied in college, I studied philosophy, and I had to take moral philosophy. And all these different theories that I studied, they all seemed to be based on what was going on today, but didn't have any kind of historical development. They didn't have any kind of evolution, you know? I'm not talking about evolution in the Darwinian sense, but like evolution in the sense of like development. How did it start? How did it grow? How did it become something? Okay. There were just rather theories that said, okay, this is what's moral and this is a moral theory, but it just applies to today. And if you took that same moral theory and applied it, say, 1,000 years earlier or 2,000 years earlier, it just fell apart. And so I started asking myself, you know, what are all these theories striving towards? And this theory that I'm going to present to you is something that I've been developing over a number of years. And I'm planning on writing about it. I mean, I have lots of this shit written down, okay? So I will be publishing it at some point. But I think that this is the solution, or at least the solution that works for me. And you be the judge if it works for you or not. And if not, well, you know, it's just something to think about. Because ultimately, it's all just stuff to think about and come to your own conclusions. Okay, so let's get started. A theory of morality. Well, it seems to me that, let me just, sorry, I'm like, yeah, okay, origins of morality. This is the first slide. It seems to me that morality or ethical behavior, when I talk about morality and ethical behavior, consider it the same thing. Morality, ethics, the same thing. What is just? Consider it all the same thing, just synonyms rather, of the same concept. Morality comes from the emotion of fairness. Notice, the emotion of fairness, which is inherent not only to human beings, but also primates and other animals. Other animals, and this is studied, and you can look it up for yourself on Google, other animals perceive things that are fair and unfair, specifically in the distribution of food. Monkeys, for instance, are willing to kill one another if they feel that the distribution of food is unfair. If one monkey is getting a disproportionate share of the food over the others. If it's within a certain bandwidth of, say, you know, plus or minus 20%, they're all okay with it. But if it's like one monkey gets it all and the other gets nothing, it's not only that the monkey that gets nothing is willing to fight, it's other monkeys that are just observing the interaction that are willing to tear apart the monkey that is hoarding all the food. And this has been studied in zoology, or the study of monkeys. I forget the name of it right now, but you get the point. The same thing happens with animals. Animals they know what's fair. And you know how you could tell the most obvious thing is, for instance, those stupid videos where they have a dog and they bring their little bowl of food and there are only like 2 nuggets. And the dog looks at it and looks up at the owner. And the look on the face is like, what the fuck are you doing? You know, like, this is unfair. It's a feeling. You got to understand it. It's an emotion. We feel that what's fair, but most especially, of course, we feel what is unfair. I mean, if something is fair, we're like, that's fine, that's fair. But if something is unfair, we feel outrage, anger, resentment. And that proves it, okay? Now, the emotion of fairness is perceived for 2 reasons. It's perceived when resources, which throughout most of human history have been limited, is allocated in a manner whereby all the members of a group will survive. Okay? Think of it in those terms. And, or, when social rewards or punishments are allocated concomitant with the individual's actions towards one or more members of the group. Now, what does that mean? Well, suppose the following. Suppose, like, I steal a pack of chewing gum from the supermarket, and I get caught, and they throw me into jail for 10 years of hard labor. Everybody would be like, that's outrageous, that's wrong. They'd say, what CRP did was wrong, he stole a pack of chewing gum. But sending him to jail for 10 years, that's unfair. It's not only that I would perceive it as unfair, me, the subject of this unjust punishment, it's that everybody else would agree with it. And they would agree to it more and more vehemently the closer they are socially to me. And this is something I'll touch on in just a little bit, but keep this in mind. If it's some injustice that's happening on the other side of the world to some people that share nothing with you, nothing culturally or racially or ethnically or religiously, then you're like, oh yeah, that's awful, but you really don't give a shit, okay? If it's happening to your daughter, your brother, your parent, or your cousin, it matters a hell of a lot more to you. You're gonna do a lot to fight this injustice. And as you leave, as you get farther and farther away from yourself, your emotions, the unfairness of it becomes less and less, okay? Now, but like I said, I'll get to that in just a moment. The emotion of fairness is necessary to reconcile and balance 2 things that are going on simultaneously. On the one hand, we individuals strive to get more, to survive, to compete, and to thrive. We always want more, right? But at the same time, we want to reconcile this, balance it, with the self-denying need to cooperate with the group. so that the group, including ourselves and more importantly our own offsprings, will survive and thrive into the future. So you see what's going on. See, this fairness issue, this fairness emotion, is trying to balance these two desires. On the one hand, we want to thrive and succeed for ourselves, be selfish. But on the other hand, we want to be collective, helping the group, the collective, because we human beings cannot survive on our own. We are individuals, yes, but as a species, since the dawn of our species, not 50,000 years ago, but I'm talking 5 million years ago, since the dawn of primates, human beings and our primate ancestors could only survive by being cooperative, by being a part of a social organization, of a social group. Without the collective security of that social group, our ancestors would have died. Okay? And that is hardwired into us. The emotion of fairness can only exist among beings who cannot survive without a social group that gives them collective security. Think what I'm saying. See, an animal that can survive without collective security, like a turtle, like an octopus, it does not have the sense of what is fair and unfair, because that doesn't play into it. But an animal that needs a social group in order to survive, like human beings, like monkeys, like dolphins, like dogs, like just about any animal you can think of, that animal is going to know what is fair and what is not fair. Okay? And you start looking at animals that can survive individualistically, and you'll realize that they cannot have this sense of fairness, because the group does not matter to them, because the group does not provide collective security. Okay? It's all an issue of collective security versus individual striving. The emotion of fairness is trying to balance these two contradictory desires in human beings and in all other social animals, all other animals who require a social group in order to survive. There is the tension between these two impulses, and fairness is the emotion that regulates that tension. Now, like I alluded to earlier, see, relative or perceived distance, both geographic and social, influences the strength of fairness. Like I said before, somebody on the other side of the world, I mean, who is of a different country, a different language, a different religion, a different race, something horrible happens to them and you're like, man, that's so awful. What's for dinner? And what's on TV later tonight? You see my point? Think of the two pancakes hypothetical, okay? See, I have two pancakes, and I'm sitting at the dinner table, and my brother doesn't have any pancakes. He will perceive it as unfair if I do not give him a pancake. And that's pretty obvious, right? I mean, think of like two children, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, so I know what I'm talking about. If one has two pancakes and the other doesn't have any, the one that doesn't have any is going to scream bloody murder. And of course, the parents are going to say, yeah, it's not fair. Whichever one has two pancakes, they have to give up one pancake to the other sibling, especially if they're just sitting there together. But the greater the distance between them, the less the strength of the fairness doctrine is. You see what I mean? Now, here's a key issue, which is the issue of empathy. See? More often than not, our empathy preempts us from acting in ways that are unfair. If I get two pancakes and my brother is, sitting there at the table, and I just got two pancakes and I walk in the door of the kitchen, right? Without him having to say anything, by way of the act of empathy, I will give him one of the pancakes. Because empathy, what is it? It's imagining yourself in the position of the other. And it's very easy for you to imagine yourself having no pancakes and your brother having two, and you're just staring at him while he eats two pancakes. So you see the issue of empathy. Empathy is it's separate from the issue of fairness, but it allows people to imagine the situation, the conditions whereby their own actions are unfair, and therefore head off that unfair action by giving up the pancake. You see? You see how it works? How empathy works? Okay, the closer the inequality is perceived geographically or socially, the greater the urge among all participants to right the unfairness. The more distant, the more indifferent. Think of the pancake example. I'm eating 2 pancakes, and there are starving Yemeni children on my TV. Now, those starving children in Yemen, that's a tragedy, but I'm not going to sacrifice one of my pancakes. I'm going to eat them both. And I'm going to stare at the TV showing me the corpses of these poor starving children. And I'll feel awful, but I'll eat my pancakes. And I won't consider it unfair because of the geographic distance and, more importantly, the social distance. Okay? The social distance is key. Now, failure to be fair, that is unfairness, engenders resentment when it is unresolved. Okay, resentment arises when he who has abundance does not share when the others believe he should, or when he acts in a way he should not and yet receives no punishment for those actions. Because remember, fairness is a double issue. It's an issue of resources, number one, and it's also an issue of social rewards and punishments. Okay? Because you see, social rewards and punishments, why do they arise? Because you see, somebody, the individual, is doing something either for the betterment or the detriment of the collective. I mean, think of it. See, I'm a great general or a great warrior of some sort, and I go out and I destroy the invading army. I save the city. And what happens when I come back to the city? They all hail me as a hero. They all love me. Yeah? They all love me, and they give me all kinds of prizes and accolades because what I did secured the survival of the city, i.e., I protected the collective security. Me, the individual, protected the collective security, and therefore I get praise. I get all kinds of social benefits. But suppose I'm the same general, and instead of like going out there and bravely fighting against the invading army, I chicken out and run away. What happens? Well, everybody's going to be incredibly resentful towards me. And let's, for the sake of argument, assume that the city survives, right? Because if the city doesn't survive, if everybody's killed off, then I, as the chicken shit general, got away scot-free with no social cost to my behavior. But if, of course, in this hypothetical, the city does survive, of course, they're going to be furious at me. They're going to hate me. There's going to be all kinds of opprobrium hoisted on me, excuse me. And so you see the point. It's resources and acting for the benefit or the detriment of the collective and the social reward or punishment that comes thereof. Okay? So resentment will arise when there is a failure to be fair. That is, when there is unfairness, either because the person gets overly punished for a misdeed that's not that big of a deal, or he's not punished at all for something that others consider to be bad for the collective, okay? Or bad towards any other individual. I mean, for instance, suppose I go and steal John's car, and I drive around John's car, no problem, and I go home, and I'm still with John's car, and John has no car, and he's nowhere to get it back. Everybody would consider that unfair to John, and they'd be resentful towards me for having stolen John's car. And perhaps they'd be resentful to the authority, whatever authority was around, that should have righted this wrong, but did not, you see? Okay, that's the issue of resentment. Now, resentment is the turning, what is resentment? It's key to understand what it is. It's the turning of social alliance into social enmity. Prolonged and unresolved resentment leads to the collapse of the social unit, be it family, tribe, or nation. Think of it in like these terms. In the 2 pancake situation with my brother, I have 2 pancakes. He has none. And he whines that it's unfair. But let's suppose, for the sake of argument, in this example, the parents don't do anything. They're just like, oh, hush, okay? Which is even more unfair, right? They tell the sibling with no pancakes to be quiet. And I eat the 2 pancakes, and my brother just stares at me furious. He feels it's incredibly unfair. he feels resentment because there was not a sharing of resources. And on top of that, to add insult to injury, there was no punishment for me. And in fact, punishment for him for whining about the fact that it was unfair, right? So he's very resentful. Two siblings, ordinarily you would think that they would be allies in survival, but with resentment, they become enemies. It doesn't matter if both feel resentment towards one another or only one feels resentment towards the other and the other feels indifference or even love and loyalty. What matters is that at least one feels resentment. If only one feels resentment, then that bond, unless it's resolved, unless the issue is resolved somehow, and somehow the aggrieved party is made to feel better one way or the other by way of a bribe or by way of consolation or whatnot, well, eventually that bond will collapse. And that's in a family, that's in a tribe, it's in a society, okay? Conversely, of course, consistent acts of fairness engenders loyalty. That is a greater bond. And think of it. Suppose I have a lot of something. Suppose, for the sake of argument, that my brother has 2 pancakes and I have 5. Okay? He's got pancakes, right? So, but suppose I say to him, oh, you know, this is too much for me. Here, have 2 more. He's going to be thankful. Of course, this is a very trivial and simple example, but you can see the point. See, if there is no perception of unfairness, and yet the person who has more gives to him who does not have or has less, there is a closer bond between the two. And not only between the two, but also between those who observe the interaction. Because they look at the person who gave up some of his, who sacrificed some of his resources for the others, for the other individual or for the other perhaps several, and they see that person as a quote unquote good person. And that engenders good feeling towards them. You see? So if he who has abundance shares when there is no perceived unfairness, if he does not, that is largesse, this creates loyalty in both who receive this bounty and those who do not benefit from it but are aware of it. Okay? Loyalty is the strength of social alliance, be it family, tribe, or nation. Loyalty is credit for the future, for future difficulties. The more loyalty you build, the more you will be helped in the future when you need it. You see? That's why it's so important. Now, a key issue insofar as fairness is concerned is that there is often a mismatch in perceptions of fairness between social participants. Suppose the following. Suppose I've got 5 pancakes and my brother has 2. Okay? And suppose, just for the sake of argument, that I'm much bigger than my brother. My brother is little. Let's say that he weighs, I don't know, 120 pounds, and I weigh 220 pounds. I'm a lot bigger guy because I do a lot of exercise, and he's just a little guy because he's young or whatever. And so he has 2 pancakes and I have 5. And I don't think it's unfair. I mean, he's happy. I mean, he can barely finish 2 pancakes, right? And I just gobble up my 5. Our parents don't perceive it as unfair. After all, the little kid is getting, a couple of pancakes, and he can't even finish the second pancake. And and I'm getting pancakes. So nobody considers it fair, but the kid, he considers it unfair. Irrespective of whether the other person, me in this case, thinks it's fair or the observers of the situation think it's fair, he thinks it's unfair. And so because of it, that's a mismatch of fairness, okay? And this happens all the time, that people feel that the situation is unfair, even though to everyone else considers it perfectly fair. But that person does not consider it fair. See? Even if he is satisfied with the resources that he had. I mean, in the example of I have 5 pancakes and my brother has 2. My little brother could barely finish the second one. Let's posit that he doesn't even finish it because he's so stuffed with pancakes that he can't finish it. But still he considers it unfair because I have 5 and he has 2. It doesn't matter what everybody else in the world thinks. He considers that unfair, and therefore there is a mismatch of fairness. One person in the interaction considers it unfair, and the other or others consider it fair. And more likely than not, the one who considers it fair, or those who consider it fair, will never realize that there is someone who considers it unfair, or they will dismiss the claims of unfairness. And this creates resentment. Okay? Now, on the flip side, their issue of guilt. Guilt is when empathy leads you to believe that your actions were not fair, irrespective of whether others think so or not. This is the flip side of unfairness mismatch. See, you feel guilty because you acted in a way, either you didn't share resources, or you acted in a way that perhaps harmed others or one other person, and you received no punishment, or you didn't do something or whatnot, whatever it is. See, it's because your empathy leads you to think that what you did was unfair. That had you been in the other guy's shoes, you would have said, yes, this is unfair. You see? And notice something. See, it's a function of empathy. This is why psychopaths never feel guilt, and they can go off and kill whomever they want. And it never even crosses their mind to feel guilty, because they can't imagine the other person being in the other person's shoes. They have no empathy. And this is a definition of a psychopath, by the way, that they don't have empathy. But why they don't have guilt is because they don't have empathy. Guilt is a function of empathy. You see? Guilt is in essence your anxiety that by your unfair behavior, you have weakened the social bonds that you have with your society, and thereby expose yourself to loss of social protection. You see what's going on? Think of it historically. Most of human history, most of it, the vast majority of it, we were walking around in tribes, small tribes of, between half a dozen and 30 people. Now, what would happen if you acted in a way that was unfair? If it was really unfair, the tribe would eject you and you'd have to fend for yourself. And what would happen in such a situation? You'd likely die, because human beings need collective security in order to survive. And therefore, it was incumbent on you to never antagonize your tribe, i.e., never act in a way that the tribe would consider grossly unfair. But suppose you act in a way that you think is unfair. Your empathy leads you to conclude that what you did was unfair. You feel very guilty. You feel awful. And anybody who's ever felt severe guilt for something that they have done will know what I'm talking about. It's the most dreadful feeling. Why do you feel it? It's the anxiety of thinking that you can lose collective protection. In fact, guilt is an incredibly powerful and important emotion, because it regulates your behavior to ensure that you comply with the group, and therefore the group will continue to grant you collective security. You see how important guilt is? Guilt is not just some random emotion that we feel that, I feel guilty about something, but fuck it. No. It has a reason for it. The emotion of guilt arose for a reason. All emotions arise for a reason. Our emotions as human beings evolved, and they evolved for reasons. And guilt, that feeling that, you feel awful that you did or did not do something, that feeling of guilt is because you're afraid. You're afraid of what? That the tribe will abandon you for your actions. Yeah? And what do guilty people do? Or people who feel guilt, what do they usually do? They go up to the person that they believe they have wronged and say, please forgive me. I'm so sorry for this or that or the other. And they are trying to make amends. I mean, people say they try to make amends, but what does that mean? It means to bribe your way back into the good graces of the individual that you harmed, not only so that you get their approval, but also the approval of the group, and they will therefore not kick you out of the group. Making amends is an inherited evolutionary aspects of our psychology that comes from us trying to get back in our group, even if the group does not know what we have done, because we fear that eventually they will find out what we have done and therefore expunge us from the group. You see what's going on? That's why guilt is very, very important. And guilt is the primary negative emotion of morality. You got to keep this in mind. It's the stick. If on the one hand we want to do good so that we get welcomed into the city as a hero, and everybody loves us and everybody throws flowers at us and just like laughs at all our jokes and wants us to go to all the parties, yeah? The flip side, the stick of that carrot and stick equation is guilt. It's the fear of being expunged from the group. Okay, now let's move on to moral systems. This origins of morality is basically, as I see, like I said, the origin of morality. What are moral systems? Okay, so a moral or ethical system, again, morality, ethics, justice, it's all the same thing. They're all synonyms. Moral systems, including those of religious origin, are attempts to create a priori principles that can successfully answer all questions of fairness. Think of it. What is every moral system? Think of the Ten Commandments. You know, apart from the first one, there is no God except God, or whatever, thou shalt have no other God, right? What is it all about? It's about, you know, don't take stuff. Don't take the Lord's name in vain, but also don't steal your neighbor's ass. Don't steal your neighbor's wife. Don't steal, don't take, don't do this, don't do that. What are they? They are a priori principles. And they are supposed to ensure that you act in a fair way. Look at Immanuel Kant and his categorical imperative. The categorical imperative is act in such ways that its universality does not lead to contradictory. Act by such maxims, rather, that their universality does not lead to contradiction. That's basically the categorical imperative, i.e., act in ways that if everybody did it, there would be no contradictions, i.e., there would be no there'd be no contradiction. Everybody would do it. And the simple example that I was taught in university was, you know, reading over somebody's shoulder, reading the newspaper over somebody's shoulder on the commuter train. If everybody did that, then nobody would get a newspaper, and therefore nobody would be able to read the newspaper. See, it would be contradictory. You see, that's the categorical imperative in a nutshell. But it's very clever. It's a very clever idea. But all moral systems are basically this. Moral systems are attempts to rationalize and codify fairness and essentially create an algorithm that correctly anticipates these feelings of unfairness in all participants for any given situation and correctly resolves them in a manner that all consider fair. You see? It's an algorithm, like a computer algorithm. It's sort of like, you know, a system whereby you just put in the input of the situation, and at the end of it, the outcome comes out, and you say, okay, this has to happen, and that has to happen, and everybody will be okay, and everything will be fair. Done. That's it. That's what all moral systems are. They are attempts to create a computer of fairness, where you input the situation, and the output is how you resolve it so that everything is fair. The problem is that, see, since fairness is inherently irrational, every single attempt at a moral system will inevitably fail. And how can I prove this? With the mismatch of unfairness. That mismatch whereby the younger brother gets 2 pancakes and I get 5, and everybody thinks it's fair, but he doesn't think it's fair. There's a mismatch of fairness. And it's irrational. Everybody agrees that it's okay that he only gets 2 and I get 5. Hell, I ate the 5 pancakes and I'm still hungry. whereas he ate the 2 pancakes and he could barely finish the second one. Everybody who looks at the situation says it's fair, but he doesn't. And fairness is an irrational, it's an emotion. It's irrational by definition, okay? Because some people will think that one situation is fair and others will think that the situation is unfair. That's why no moral system can ever be created. There is no universal moral system. Why do we have this need for a moral system? Is actually the more interesting question. And the need for a moral system arises for 2 reasons. Number one, when a society becomes too numerous for simple determinations of fairness between its members. It's too numerous and people don't know each other. And so we need to create some sort of system of fairness, of morality, because there are so many people and they don't know one another, okay? And the other reason is when the society anticipates that future events will bring about questions of fairness that must be answered preemptively, or else risk causing unfixable resentment in the society, which will lead to its self-destruction. Because a lot of times, see, especially as of the last 1,000 years, specifically the last 500, 300 years, society, technology has been improving and creating conditions such that we realize in an inarticulate way that problems will arise in the future that need to be addressed and solved somehow because of our society becoming increasingly more and more complex. And because of this complexity that is arising and which we can easily anticipate, we realize that we need to have some sort of moral system that can answer them all, that can answer these forthcoming questions, these forthcoming moral dilemmas, dilemmas of fairness that we know are arising, but we need to solve them now before it creates resentments that will tear apart our society, okay? Now, simple rules of fairness that all in a given society can agree upon without debates are deemed laws. Yeah, because there are simple rules in our society that in every human society, practically, we all agree. To give a simple, obvious example, if I go up, I'm walking down the street and I come across some random woman I've never seen before. I have no idea her name. And I just take out a gun and shoot her in the head 3 times to make sure that she's really dead, right? Fuck it, I'm going to go straight to jail. And there isn't a society in the world that would act any different because I just went up and randomly shot some poor woman. I killed her dead right on the sidewalk there for no reason whatsoever. That kind of, and suppose, to add insult to injury, suppose that I decided early on, I said, like a week ago, I said, something? Next Sunday, I'm going to get a gun and I'm going to go and shoot some random person that I have no idea, I've never met before. I'm just going to kill her dead. I premeditated this random murder, okay? Every society in the world would agree that's fucking evil. That is fucking evil and you should be punished. Every society would agree, and not just every society today, every society in all of human history. Even the most bloodthirsty societies would agree, shit, man, that's fucking evil. You should be punished for it, okay? And the punishment would be whatever that society thinks is fair, but that's not the point. The point is, see, there are certain actions that in every society, no matter how diverse, everybody will agree are bad things and should be prohibited. Killing a random stranger, poisoning the water supply, killing a child. I mean, you can go on, and you know what I'm talking about. I mean, this is not up for debate, yeah? These are, or not, it's not that up for debate. Everything is up for debate, but the point is, see, it's not something that I really need to prove. That's pretty obvious, that there are certain rules that we all agree are bad. Laws are often as not post hoc rules arising out of specific unanticipated problems of fairness in a society, okay? I'm not talking about the big laws like, thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal. I'm talking about all the other kinds of laws that arise over time. More often than not, a law will be written, will be created because a problem arose, a problem of unfairness. And so the society, no matter how it's structured legally insofar as passing a new law, it will create a new law for this unfairness that people will think, no, it's unfair and we should have a law to prohibit it. You see, that's how laws arise. But see, of course, laws are blunt instruments. Laws are for everyone, and they have to be the same for everyone. But every situation is different. Okay. Again, think of the pancake example, me eating 5 pancakes, my little brother eating 2. I mean, you're not going to pass a law about such a thing, right? It would be absurd. I mean, it's so trivial. It might happen a lot, but it's so trivial. And how would you enforce it? I mean, there are the practical limitations of law enforcement. You can't have policemen, right, staring at a couple of kids and watching how many pancakes they eat. It'd be crazy. Okay. So the law is a blunt instrument that applies to everyone. Mm-hmm. But the individual cases of unfairness, that's a different story, you see? And that's why we need a moral system, because laws cannot cover every instance of fairness and unfairness, you see? Because ultimately, the application of fairness or unfairness, the punishment and the rewards for fairness or unfairness, they come from the society. The law is merely one more expression of the society, an instrument of the society, but it's not the entire society. Mm-hmm. In the case of me eating, say, 2 pancakes and my brother getting 0, it's not the law or the state that would punish me. It would be my parents. And my parents would say, what the hell are you doing? You eating 2 pancakes and your little brother gets 0? Fuck you. Give him one of the pancakes now. And they'd smack me upside the head. That would be my on-the-spot spontaneous punishment for my unfairness of eating 2 pancakes while my little brother gets 0. You see? But the parents, they're members of society. You got to keep in mind, society is us. Okay? Okay. So, now, why is there no universal moral system that has so far succeeded? Well, it should be obvious, because fairness is inherently irrational and subjective. There are fairness mismatches among participants, as explained before, where I ate 5 pancakes and my little brother barely could finish the second, right? Because fairness is irrational and subjective, okay? Not to mention situational, such a wide variety of potential situations that it's unpredictable in a practical sense. That's why that's one of the reasons why there's no universal moral system, let alone some sort of absolute moral system. Fairness is socially constructed. And this is a key issue. And don't let it scare you off because the fucking postmodernists talk about social constructs. In this case, fairness actually is a social construct. Because what one family, tribe, or society considers fair and reasonable, another would consider outrageous. Let me give you an example. In the Aztec Empire, right? They thought that all prisoners of war should be executed in fairly bloodthirsty ways in order to appease the gods. And they all thought it was perfectly reasonable and perfectly just, perfectly fair. Yeah, you lost a war, we captured you. Fuck yeah, we're going to sacrifice you on our altar and chop up your body and toss your body parts down the staircase of our big temple where we're going to sacrifice your ass. And they cheered. They thought it was great. Look at the movie Apocalypto. It shows that shit. It's grim as fuck. But anyway, they thought that was perfectly fair. And what would we say? We'd say, that's fucking bloodthirsty, right? It's incredibly bloodthirsty. Whereas we, for instance, think it's perfectly fair for a woman to abort her child for the sake of her career. Whereas people in, say, some other country or some other epoch would think that that's the most bloodthirsty and despicable thing. I personally believe that in a few decades, not too far from now, as a matter of fact, people will look back on the issue of abortion and say, yeah, those fuckers were bloodthirsty and despicable, and it was totally unfair and immoral. You see my point. Fairness, morality, it's socially constructed. This is because all moralities are striving to balance 2 things: collective security with individual ambition in the given society where they are practiced. And that's the issue of fairness. Each of us is striving to get the best we can for ourselves, and yet at the same time, we recognize that we have an issue of collective security, and we cannot antagonize the source of that collective security, because if we do, we will lose this collective security and therefore be destroyed by the environment. Because remember, human beings cannot survive on their own. And yet we, human beings, individually want more. That's the tension. Now, a quick side note here. Anyway, just to round off the point, why no universal moral system has so far succeeded? For these reasons, there can never be an objective or universal morality. The effort to find such an objective and universal morality is idiotic. It's just missing the point altogether. It's just completely missing the point, because each society changes, and because they change, the moral framework, the moral structure of that society changes too. What was once considered outrageous then becomes the norm. What is once the norm becomes outrageous. And it's because of the balance between individual desires and collective security. And this is a key issue, and you're going to see it in the next slide when I discuss the issue of political ideologies, because political ideologies emerge from this issue of collective security versus individual desire and achievement. Now, a quick side note on the issue of purity. A lot of people think that purity is part of morality. Okay. Jonathan Haidt, by the way, has a whole moral foundations theory. It's a crock of shit. It's completely stupid, because it's basically he threw up, and his group just threw up, and they admit that they threw up just ad hoc concepts to see what would stick insofar as what's morality. It doesn't have any kind of intellectual or theoretical framework. This theory that I'm presenting does have a theoretical framework. It's very clear theoretically where each element arises from. The moral foundations theory, it's just a hodgepodge. It's just a little bit of a joke, to tell you the truth. And I do not understand why people take it so seriously, because it's just full of shit. But anyway, they talk about purity. That purity is actually one of the moral principles, moral foundations, as Jonathan Haidt says. It's stupid. It's not. See, purity, i.e. cleanliness, virginity, wholesomeness, right? It's not a part of morality, but it's often confused as such, because purity is so often, but not always, beneficial for collective security in the sense of protecting collective health. And think about it. See, that which is dirty, that which is unclean, that which is infected, what will happen to collective security? Well, it'll infect others, and the others will die. And that's why, for instance, lepers were kicked out of the tribe, because it was believed, rightly or wrongly, that leprosy was catchy and that others would suffer from it. And in fact, because of it, because they were expunged from the collective group, in order to explain why they were expunged, their malady had to be interpreted as a moral failing. That is, they were not good. They had sinned. They had done something bad. And that gave them the justification to eject somebody. Because why do you eject somebody on the basis of this theory? On the basis of this theory, you eject them when they act in ways that are unfair or bad for the collective. If it's bad for the collective, they eject you. Unfairness causes resentment, which is bad for the collective. You're rejected. See? And so this is the point of it. This is why purity has nothing to do with morality. It's an inherent feeling that when we see something unpure, unclean, we immediately gag. Mm-hmm. You ever seen somebody with leprosy? It's fucking horrifying. Yeah, you see somebody with leprosy, and you want to throw up. Mm-hmm. It's the gag reflex. It's the body signaling, get the fuck away from this shit because it's going to hurt me. And that irrational feeling is misinterpreted as a moral issue. And that's why so many societies consider issues of purity to be moral issues. Look at Judaism, for instance, and Judaism and Islam, for instance, and insofar as how they treat the issue of eating pork. It's a moral issue for them. But it's actually not. It's an issue of collective health that has been repurposed and turned into a moral issue. You see? And that's why the issue of purity, don't get it confused. Because, see, morality, fairness, is about collective health. Collective health in the sense of the health of the collective group, be it the family, tribe, or society, or nation. And purity is also about that, but it's from a different direction. It has nothing to do with good or evil. You see? And by the way, I forgot to mention this. I should have put it there. You see, there is no objective good and evil. There isn't. In a very real sense, the title Beyond Good and Evil, that's essentially correct. It's all a social construct. Okay? What you consider good and what other people consider good is not necessarily the same thing, and ditto with evil. There can never be an objective or universal morality. How can I put it? Most, if not every single human being on the face of the planet can agree that certain actions are bad, but there's always going to be somebody who doesn't agree. Always. Okay? That's why there can never be an objective and universal morality. Now, the third point here. Political ideologies. Now, this is key. Recall, all moralities, call them doctrines of fairness if you want to, strive to balance collective security with individual ambition in the given society where they are practiced, right? That's the key issue of moralities, of all moralities, right? Okay, so a society or tribe or family that is under stress will not tolerate any unfair member or group of members. Yeah, think of it. Suppose the following. Suppose you are in a, let me give you an example. You're a castaway. You and 10 other people are castaways on a desert island. You're all under stress. You don't know each other, but you're all under stress. You want to survive. And you realize inherently, instantly, that you can't survive on your own. So what do? You all work together, right? And if one of your members is hoarding food or not pulling their weight or whatnot, if they don't pitch in, the rest of the group will not tolerate that member. And potentially they will expel him from that group. And you know that intuitively. You know that, and you've probably seen like Survivor or some shit like that. I myself have never seen Survivor, to tell you the truth. But I know more or less what it's about. And I bet that there was more than one episode where one guy was a complete asshole who didn't do anything, didn't contribute anything, or hoarded food or other resources and wanted more for himself and was willing to run the risk of losing the good opinion of the rest. And eventually the rest of them kicked him out. Yeah, sure, of course. That's going to happen. See? In a stressed society, tribe, or family, all will be expected to pitch in for the benefit of collective survival. Thus, such a society will be more collectivist and will frown on individualism and or selfishness. Think of it. You're in a nation that is at war, and it's losing the war, or the war is at a standstill or whatever. But the point is, see, everybody is miserable, but I mean, the war is going terribly, right? And you, are they going to tolerate you having like a lot of money or a lot of food for yourself or a lot of resources or whatnot? Are they going to tolerate you like trying to shirk your military obligations or something like that? Or in other words, not pitching in for the war effort, right? I mean, the whole nation, the nation you live in, is on a war footing, trying to survive this war and win. Do you think that they're really going to put up with you like not pulling your weight? Do you think that they're going to say, oh, it's perfectly fine? No, they're going to be fucking pissed off. Yeah, they're going to be pissed off, and they're not going to tolerate it. And you are going to realize it. And because of the social pressure around you, you're not going to knuckle under. Of course. See, because everybody always says that, oh, I can stand up for myself and I don't care, blah, blah, blah. I don't care about society. Fuck you. Everybody cares about society. Everybody does. Okay, we always care about the opinions of others. We always care about the opinion of the people in our society. Because, again, first principles, it goes back to the issue that human beings cannot survive on our own. We need the collective in order to survive. And if the collective turns its collective back on us, we're fucked. And that's why we care. And that's why we knuckle under when the social signals coming our way saying, hey, buddy, what you're doing is not cool. we knuckle under. Mhm. Conversely, of course, in societies with self-perceived greater collective security, whether it's real or not, it's self-perceived greater collective security, there will be a greater tolerance for unfair or so-called selfish individuals or groups of individuals. Think of it, you live in a society that's perhaps it's not rich, but it feels very secure and safe. Whether it's real or not, that's not the point. Everybody feels, or the majority feels, that everything is very secure and safe, and everything is very stable, and no worries, as it were, right? And so in such a society, it's going to be okay to be more of an individualist, more okay to be out for yourself. In fact, this society will be more self-consciously individualistic and celebrate individualism. Why? Because the collective security will allow for this individualism to flourish. In the previous example, or the previous situation, the converse situation, where the collective security is under stress, in such a situation, everybody is expected to pitch in to help all of us survive, okay? Because remember, when you help a collective, you might sacrifice yourself and die in order to save the collective. But see, the collective is going to take care of your kids once you're gone. See? The collective, because your kids are part of the collective. Yeah? I mean, you care for your kids more than you care for your neighbors in this collective, right? But still, your kids are a part of this collective. And so if you sacrifice yourself for the sake of the collective will take care of your kids. And in fact, if it is clear that you made a self-sacrifice of your life for the collective will make even more efforts to take care of your children because you're a hero. You see? Okay, but on the converse side here, when the society is really secure, there's no external threat, then it can allow people to be more individualistic, more selfish, because the collective is strong. The sense of collective security is strong. And in such a condition, of course, individualistic political ideologies will naturally arise, and unbridled ambition will be considered morally good and celebrated. That's the whole point of objectivism. And in fact, I would argue it's the reason objectivism, Reagan Thatcher, laissez-faire capitalism, and Nietzsche, they all arose in these societies that had strong collective security. They felt confident in their collective security, and that's why they became popular. Remember, do keep in mind, it's not that these writers or these ideas originated in these periods. No, it's that the majority, or not a majority, but a large segment of the population took up these ideas and embraced them. You see? Because, for instance, Ayn Rand, she's popular in the West, which has strong collective security. Do you think that Ayn Rand is popular in, say, some African nation that's constantly at war? No. The notion of individualism in such a nation where everybody's under duress and individualism is frowned upon because everybody's got to work together so as to survive as a collective nation. Yeah, that kind of ideology, objectivism, has no place. The worship of the individual has no place in such a society under duress. In a society that is secure in its collective security, then yes, like the West. You see? Just because somebody happens to write something doesn't mean that it becomes popular. It only becomes popular when the conditions allow for it. See? Ditto with Nietzsche. Okay. So, secure societies will tolerate, because of this, because that secure societies are more self-consciously individualistic, such societies will tolerate greater socioeconomic distance between members at the top and the bottom. That makes complete sense now, doesn't it? Because in a society where there's a strong sense of collective security, whereby individuals are given free rein to their ambitions and allowed and indeed encouraged to be quote unquote selfish, there are a lot more people who are going to strive to get to the top and will get to the top. And so the extremes between the top and the bottom will grow. However, in large anonymized societies, there will be fairness mismatches between groups of members, especially between those of the economic extremes. Remember, fairness mismatches are when one party perceives that the situation is unfair. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter, because remember, unfairness is a subjective opinion. Okay? It's never objective. It's irrational. It's a feeling. You can't control it. Now, if those people at the bottom feel that it's unfair, okay, those at the top will think the society is fair, of course, because they're at the top. And those at the bottom will think it's unfair. Those in the middle, and the middle is always the battleground, those in the middle will think it is fair, the society is fair, so long as there is a credible belief among them that either they or their children can rise to the top of the socioeconomic hierarchy. And this is a key issue. See, nobody minds if they're middle class so long as they believe there is the promise that they can become upper class, that they can become rich. If people are convinced that they can become rich if they try, no problem. They're okay with being lower middle class or even low class, or even poor. They don't mind if there is the credible belief that they can get to the top. Okay? That's a key issue, and that's the battleground. Now, this fairness mismatch, whereby the bottom thinks that the society is unfair and the top think it's fair, this fairness mismatch will create resentment among those at the bottom of the hierarchy, or those in the middle echelons who believe they can never rise to the top of the hierarchy, leading to a desire to punish those at the top of society. What does this mean? It means that, see, if you're at the bottom and you think that the society is unfair, right? And you're going to want to punish those at the top. Now, whether you can or not is not the issue. You will want to punish them either in whatever way you can imagine, right? Taking away their riches, or, flogging them, or whatever the fuck. It doesn't matter. But you want to punish them. Now, those in the middle, they will also feel resentment if they become convinced that they cannot rise. Because, see, those in the middle who think that they cannot rise, they will think it's unfair. And because they think it's unfair, but there's no resolution, because those at the top think it's fair, and those in the middle who believe that they can rise also think it's fair. Well, those at the bottom and those in the middle who think that they cannot rise and therefore the society is unfair, those people will become more and more resentful. And what will matter is their numbers. Because if they're, say, 15%, okay, that's fairly large, but it's not a revolutionary number. Now, what that revolutionary number is, that tipping point, it depends on all kinds of factors, but there is such a point. There is such a point where, in terms of number of people in the population, that they think this society is unfair. They are resentful, and they are getting no satisfaction. Their grievances are not being met. There is a tipping point. And once that tipping point is met, revolution occurs, okay? Hence, redistributive political ideologies will always arise among groups of people at the bottom of the society, led by middle echelon members who have become convinced that the top echelon is unfair and or believe that they can never arise to the top. You see? These political ideologies, communism, capitalism, they will always be with us. Always. The only thing that matters is, are there enough numbers for them to matter? There will always be people who are resentful. There will always be people who think that the society, that the system is unfair. The only thing that matters is, are there enough of these people to cause real change? This redistributive political ideology and the resentment that fuels it will ebb, that is, it will go down, in a given society only when, number one, the resentful members remain few and or politically disorganized. Number two, the members at the top voluntarily acquiesce to some form of redistribution that all sectors in the society genuinely consider to be fair. And that, of course, is the least likely. Nobody wants to give up quietly and peacefully and voluntarily their advantages, right? And the third possibility that will bring down the strength of these redistributive political ideologies is the society as a whole suffers a shock that affects everyone equally. For instance, a natural disaster or a war. Let me give you an example. In Chile in 1960, in early 1960, I'm talking January, February, there were a lot of political problems, right? But in May of 1960, Chile was hit with the absolute worst earthquake in recorded history. Not kidding. It was like 9.8, okay? And it was catastrophic. A third of the country was destroyed, okay? And because of this calamitous natural disaster, all political problems were set aside. All resentments, all political arguments, they were just thrown aside. Just nobody could give a shit because everybody got to the task of rebuilding because everybody suffered the same. And they all suffered tremendously, rich and poor alike, okay? I mean, there were rich families whose houses collapsed and killed everybody inside. There were poor families who were left destitute. You know, I mean, everybody suffered. I mean, it was the wrath of God that hit everybody, rich and poor, old and young. And because of it, the society set aside all of these redistributive ideologies and pulled together. And this unity lasted actually a good 4 or 5 years before, you know, finally the country was more or less rebuilt, and then the old resentments rose up again, and then we had all kinds of problems because eventually we had a communist regime in Chile. But you see the point I'm trying to make. See, these are the three ways that these redistributive political ideologies can be not suppressed, but their rising tide, you know, ebbs. The resentful members are few, or they remain politically disorganized. And of course, political sabotage is the way that a lot of countries have handled these redistributive political ideologies. Okay, that's number one. Or the members of the top voluntarily give up their share. They try to make it fair. Okay, this is very rare. I mean, I can't think of offhand of any time historically that this has ever happened, but theoretically it would be possible. Because of course, you know, it goes back to the human notion of, oh, I have 2 pancakes and you don't have any. Okay, I'll give you one. See? And when you do that, the resentment of the other guy naturally calms down. Okay? He might have been silently resentful that you're eating 2 pancakes and he doesn't have a one. But if you just voluntarily stop and say, hey, sorry, here's one of my pancakes. I'm sorry that I was eating 2 of them and you didn't have any. All of a sudden the resentment goes right out the window. It's a natural human notion, okay? A natural human reaction to such a situation. And of course, it applies not just to individuals, but also to groups. But of course, you know, that kind of voluntary acquiescence is very difficult. And the third, like I said, some sort of shock that affects everyone equally. Negative shock, of course, that affects everybody equally, and therefore makes everybody need to pitch in for a collective security once again. And the notion of these redistributive political ideologies goes away. So anyway, I hope I've explained to you, I mean, here we are at the end of the presentation, and I hope I've explained to you my theory of morality. Now, of course, this is like a quick sketch, and it's a fairly complicated theory. And that's why I'm glad I sent out that that handout, because I think that it can help you follow along with this whole thing. How could I put this? Okay, I'm gonna sound really arrogant and like a full of shit, but okay, fine. I mean, you guys know that I'm an arrogant son of a bitch. I think that this is the right moral theory. I think that everybody else, I'm talking everybody else, they're basically wrong about morality. This is it. It's an issue of fairness. And I can tell you that I've given it some thought, and my own background is such that I studied history and I studied philosophy in university. But see, the real origin of the real starting point of my intellectual life was math. When I was a boy, when I was about, I don't know, 9, 10 years old, I became a math junkie. I just loved math. And I loved the high I would get from getting to the right answer. I didn't, how can I put it? It's not that I was interested in being right. That wasn't it at all. I've never really cared about being right. I've always cared about that high you get from hitting the right answer. And it comes from, like I said, my experiences as a boy. As a boy, I would just gobble up all those problem sets that I'd get for homework or whatnot. I just love doing them. I love that feeling, that high, that happiness, that joy I would get when I would get the right answer. Because in math, there is always a right answer, or to put more properly, more correctly, there is always a finite set of correct answers for any given problem. And that finite set is specific, okay? And if you get the wrong answer, it's just wrong, you know? And what happened was that as I did all these math problems growing up, of course I would make mistakes, but what happened was that I never held on to the wrong answer because I wasn't interested in the answer, of having the right answer. I was interested in that feeling of being correct, of getting the right answer. I didn't care about the right answer per se. And therefore, I viewed getting the right answer as the means to the end. The end was getting high off of being correct. The mean was arriving at the correct answer. And if perchance I got the wrong answer, if I got an answer and then plugged it back in the equation to see if it equaled 0 and it didn't equal 0, then I wouldn't say, oh, but this is the right answer and argue it. No, I'd say, shit, this is the wrong answer. What's the right answer? And I work and work and work until finally I found an answer or a set of answers that when plugged into the equation, it would once again equal 0. And that would mean I was right, that I got the right answer, and I would get high. And so because of that, over the years, I never really cared about the answer. I only cared about that high. And, when I came up with this concept, there are a lot of mistakes here and there or issues that I have to fully develop. But fundamentally, yeah, this is the right answer. Mm-hmm. And I know it because I know that feeling of being high and I look at other people who have discussed this problem and trying to come up with answers, right? And they're wrong. I just look at them and I just know that they're wrong. I mean, it's like when somebody says, yeah, the answer of 2 times 3 is 7. I'm like, no, it's not 7, it's 6. And they're like, no, it's 7. I know it's, I'm telling you, dude, I know it's wrong. I know it, okay? And yeah, and how do I know it? Yeah, because you plug it into the equation, the original equation, and you get it wrong. Well, in this case, for instance, a simple equation, x minus 3 is 0, therefore x equals 3. And that's x equals 3. That's the answer. And if you plug it back into the equation, you replace x with 3. 3 minus 3 equals 0, right? And somebody comes at me and says, no, x is 5. I'm like, no, it's not. And they're like, x is 5. And I just say, look, plug it into the equation, see what happens. And they consistently insist that it's 5. And I'm like, what the fuck are you arguing? I'm not going to argue with you anymore because I know that you're wrong. See? That's how I feel with so many moral philosophers. This is the right answer. Okay? And I'm happy to discuss it. And I'm going to publish this shit eventually. Just got to get around to it. And also what happens is that I'm not really like, how can I put it? I'm not that motivated to publish the goddamn answer because I know I'm right. And so it's sort of like, oh shit, I got to like tidy it up and write all this shit up and publish it. It seems like work, because the fun part was arriving at the answer and then having to show people and convince people. I'm like, oh God, it's again, the same issue of like trying to convince people that x is 3 for the equation x minus 3 equals 0, right? I know it's the truth, and I have to go out and convince people of this shit and argue with them, argue with every numbskull who tells me that x equals 5 or x equals 1,000,000 or some shit like that. It's fucking boring. See, that's a little bit of my problem, okay? But anyway, yeah, shit, I've been talking. How long have I been talking? Holy fuck. Oh, it's not that long. So 1 hour and 20 minutes. Oh, I thought it was going to be longer. So anyway, let me... Oh God, this, unfortunately, it's not as efficient as the GoToWebinars because the GoToWebinar, it had all the questions there very neatly. Okay, so let's do this. Let's start with questions, okay? Who has a question? Yeah, we already heard from you, Russell. Write out your specific question. Okay, Steve O, it's right there in the handout. Okay, that's as concise as it gets. Basically, morality is an issue of fairness. Hmm? Fairness insofar as the individual's behavior towards other individuals and the individual's behavior towards the collective. Okay, and the collective's behavior towards the individual. Hmm? And it arises over the tension of the fact that human beings require collective security in order to survive. And like I said before at the beginning, see, if you do not have, if you are a species that does not require collective security, you don't have morality, you don't have fairness. Morality comes from fairness, that which is good and that which is evil. It's ultimately all about what is fair. And all moral systems are social constructs to the specific society that they arise from. And different societies will have different things that are considered good and considered bad, and they will change over time. Things that are considered bad will become considered good, and vice versa. See? Morality, like I said, it's flexible. It's a social construct. Because ultimately, the issue of fairness is a subjective emotion. And it's not so much the positive emotion of fairness, it's rather the negative emotion of unfairness. What we consider unfair is the driving force of this issue. And unfairness is a fundamentally irrational emotion. It's no different from desire. What do you desire? Do you desire a car, a fast car, a Ferrari? Do you desire a beautiful woman? Do you desire a pot of money? There are some people who just drool over a Ferrari, and others are indifferent to it. I mean, totally indifferent. They could give a shit. And what? The guy who's indifferent to a Ferrari, you're supposed to hit him over the head and say, hey, you should love a Ferrari? No, of course not. You'd never think of that in a million years because you know that desire is subjective. Same with unfairness. It's subjective, okay? And the example I have been using repeatedly, which is a very easy and an intuitive example, I'm eating 5 pancakes, my little brother's eating 2. He feels resentful because he's only eating 2, right? But it could be a different situation, the exact same particulars, but rather I feel guilty because I'm eating 5 and he's only eating 2. And I just gobble up my 5 pancakes. I'm still hungry, right? And I look at him and he's actually not even finished the second one, but I feel guilty. And I say to him, you know, I feel really guilty. I ate 5. And he'll look at me and I'm like stupid. And he'll say, what the fuck are you talking about? I can barely finish my second pancake. I'm stuffed. And, you know, you want what's left of my second pancake? Here, have it. He'll say to me, but I'll feel guilty. You see, it's irrational. It's irrational emotions. Okay? And that's why there can be no objective morality. None whatsoever, ever. All systems of morality are contingent on the society from which they emerge. All systems of morality ultimately are mental constructs, social constructs, mind games. Okay? There is no such thing as what is good. There is no such thing as what is evil. Mm-hmm. We might feel very guilty about doing something or other. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, for instance, you know, we go up, like I said in the previous example, I go up to some random woman that I've never seen before who's never done anything to me or to anybody, never hurt a fly, right? And I go up and plug her 3 times with a gun. Bang, bang, bang. She's dead, right? And I'm going to feel really bad about it, right? But why am I feeling so bad about it? I'm going to say, well, it's evil, but is it objectively evil? How is it evil? Well, no, in a meaningless universe, which I believe is what we exist in, this thing of good and bad, it's just inventions. There is no such thing as what is good. There is no such thing as what is bad. But we as animals, because that's what we are human beings, we are primates, we are animals. As animals, we have evolved to feel certain emotions. And we as human beings who've got a lot of IQ points, we have arrived at this notion that we have to rationalize these emotions, give them an intellectual explanation. But ultimately, there is no real explanation. Any explanation, any moral theory is ultimately a mind game. It's trying to rationalize a subjective, irrational preference. It's like trying to explain why you should adore Ferraris and desire a Ferrari above everything else. It would be stupid. I mean, if I were to write a book called, Why You Should Love Ferraris and Why You Should Desire Ferraris, everybody would say, you're high. Why are you spending 500 pages of this incredibly turgid prose in German writing this book about why you should love Ferraris? I mean, everybody would say that I was just crazy, right? But nobody bats an eye when Immanuel Kant does the exact same thing, or Hegel, or Schopenhauer, or whoever else. Because see, philosophers have missed the point. They don't get it. They do not understand what's going on. They are trying to rationalize and systematize irrational emotions. That's why morality, it doesn't exist. It's a social construct. It's no different than, the street lights, they're red and green. Why are they red and green instead of, say, blue and yellow? Why? That's a social construct. People decided, red is a good enough color to mean stop, and green is a good enough color to mean go. In and of themselves, there's no reason why red is stop and green is go. Why not blue is stop and yellow is go? And you could say, well, one is darker than the other, or this or that, but ultimately it's all bullshit. It's rationalization of an arbitrary decision that was made. You see my point? There is no such thing as objective morality. And we invent it. Jason says, let me pull on Jason. I mean, let's see this. Oh, you're on a cell phone. This is telling me it was using a cell phone. I can't talk to people on a mobile device. Damn. Okay. Sorry about that, Jason. I wanted to pull you in. I'll read Jason's question. He's thinking of, is there a way to know what happens after you die? I can tell you right now what happens after you die, Jason. Nothing. Do you remember the period of time before you were born? No? Before you existed? Yeah, because you didn't exist. And after you die, you won't know anything because you will no longer exist. That's the way of life. If I kill somebody, I would feel like I would go to hell for murder. You're not going to go to hell because there is no hell. I mean, I hate to be this kind of, black-pilled nihilist kind of thing, right? But this is the truth. I mean, you guys, you want to know like what's really going on. I'm telling you, okay? This life, it's wonderful because we have consciousness. We are able to experience things. And we are able to experience both good and bad. And we should draw value from both the good experiences and the bad experiences. Because ultimately, the measure of a life is the difference between the good days and the bad days. The greater that distance, the broader that distance, the broader the life, okay? But this life is finite, and once it's over, there is no second act. There's no hell, there's no heaven, there's no afterlife, there's no reincarnation. It's over. It's over, and you will be gone, and you will be forgotten, okay? And I don't mean this as an insult to Jason or anybody. I'm just saying it objectively. And perhaps you might have done something or written something or achieved something that will make you a little bit more memorable and make you last a little longer in the collective memory, but it's just going to be a short bit. And anyway, you will endure in the memory of people that you do not know and will never know. So what does that matter? You see my point? All you can do is just experience life and try to get along with other people, if only so as to make your own life easier. See? You get along with other people just so that you can have your life easier and perhaps achieve more of the things that you want. Because, like I said, you need other people in order to survive and thrive. And a lot of times, other people can help you achieve the ambitions that you have. And that's why you should live a quote unquote moral life and follow the rules. But you have to understand that the rules that are in place, you're just indulging them. You're just like going along with these rules so that they don't hassle you. You have to think of it in those terms. If you think of it in terms of like, oh, I'm going to be a good man and, just, be a paragon of virtue. That's why. Why are you doing that? I mean, if it's not to show off, because a lot of people do, it's called virtue signaling. But if you're actually doing it, what exactly is the point? But anyway, let me see. Vinny, somebody said that Vinny has a question. What do you think? Ryan says, let me see if Ryan can, because I want to pull in people and I want to ask them their subjective opinion as to what they think of this this platform. And yeah, Ryan, are you there? Hello, Ryan. His microphone went on and maybe his camera goes on. Ryan, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. How's it going?
Good, man. How you doing?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah. You have a question. Go ahead.
I do. So I'm not a parent. I'm kind of like an uncle by distance to some of my friends. So there's not a lot of kids in my life, but I do want to be a dad down the road.
Sure.
And right now I'm kind of looking at what's going on in the world and I'm starting to get hesitant. I'm starting to say like, okay, this is getting a little too crazy for my taste. And so I'm starting to ask that question, should I have kids? And so in preparation, if I do, what do you think, in your opinion, based on what you explained today, is the best way to teach morality to those kids in the general sense?
Yeah, okay. Good question. Okay, number one, yes, have kids because they add immeasurably to your life. They give you a reason for being, okay? And this reason for being is instilled on us, in us by evolution. And you'd say, well, I'm just responding to an evolutionary desire or evolutionary instinct. Yeah so what, when you have sex, you're also responding to an evolutionary instinct, and it's a lot of fun, right? I'm asking you, Ryan, is it fun to have sex, or do you like, no, I hate it, but
no,
evolution forces me to do it?
I hate every second of it.
Yeah, me too. That's why when I'm not having sex, sex. I'm jerking off like a little monkey because it's all kind of that horrible feeling of orgasm. Ugh, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But see, a lot of what we have is an evolutionary instinct, including having children. But it does give you a measure of happiness. And so, why is it that you're going to deny yourself giving into an evolutionary instinct that will make you feel happy, that will give you joy in your life? Yeah. So having children, that's a no-brainer. Have children. Yeah. Number one. And number two, how do you teach your children morality? Well, first of all, you got to keep in mind that it has to be age appropriate. Okay. It's like Santa Claus. A child, your son, when he's like 25, 30, of course, he's not going to believe in Santa Claus. And you're not going to tell him that Santa Claus exists, right? But when he's little, when he's like, 4, of course, you're going to tell him that Santa Claus exists, right? It's age appropriate. Yeah. When a child is little, teach them the conventional morality. Oh, don't steal, don't kill anybody, don't do this, do that, help your mother, wash the dishes, take out the garbage, shit like that, right? Do the standard morality. But because they're children and you have to teach them what's age appropriate. But when they're a little bit older and a little more sophisticated, then you can have a more sophisticated conversation with them. There's nothing wrong with that. But, always age appropriate. That's my thinking. Okay. And also, insofar as children are concerned, the simpler, the better. And a final issue insofar as children is concerned, never look at them like your friends. Your children or nieces and nephews or whatnot, they are not your friends. You are the adult. And so act like an adult. Never show them weakness or insecurity. Because when an adult shows them weakness and insecurity, they feel weak. They feel insecure. They feel frightened. Okay? They don't want that. And you wouldn't want that on them either. I mean, think of it in these terms. You remember when you were a child of 5, 7, right, Ryan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. what would you think of some adult who came up to you and say, "Oh, I'm so worried about my job. I don't know if I'm going to keep my job, and I don't know if I'm going to have money to buy you food tomorrow." Suppose one of your parents said that to you. What would you think at the time, and what would you think now as a grown man?
I can tell you because that's what my parents said to me.
Oh shit! Sorry, man.
That's one of the reasons I'm listening to you. I'm glad I found you. No, I mean the way you feel confused. You don't have a guiding compass on how to lead your life. And like for me, I'm in my 30s, and I'm just now starting to get my shit together because of that.
Yeah, exactly. See, there is selfishness, there is stupidity of treating you like a friend instead of acting like adults and treating you as a child because you were a child. Yeah, see, because if your parents say now at your mid-30s, right, and your parents are, I don't know, 60 or something, suppose now they're having economic problems, but you're an adult. And so if they were to tell you about that, that would be a totally different situation. And it would be age appropriate. You're an adult man. Adult child, sure, you're their child, but you're a grown man. But as a 7-year-old, no. So always keep that in mind. Age appropriate. Now, anything else on your mind, Ryan?
No, man, that's it. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. How long you been a subscriber, by the way?
Oh, about a month or two now.
Yeah, getting your money's worth?
Oh, absolutely. I've been going back through your archives on YouTube and all the stuff you posted here. It's very, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Good. Oh, I'm glad. I mean, it's important to give value. That's the whole point of it. Anyway, Ryan, thanks for being on, and I'll catch you next week, I hope. Oh, by the way, what do you think of this Demio platform? Has it worked out for you?
Yeah, so far. It was a little hard to kind of follow everybody else's questions like you were saying, but I mean, it seemed like it kicked on the mic real easily, and that side of it worked fine.
Great to hear. Okay, man, take it easy. Catch you next week.
All right, man, have a good weekend.
Let's see. Let me go through the questions. Sorry, guys. I'm like, in a society, what is the relationship between fairness and enforcement? Alejandro has a question. Let me pull in Alejandro. Let me see. Alejandro. I think this is the right Alejandro. There's only one Alejandro. Good. Alejandro, are you there? Actually, I'm going to turn on my webcam. Hang on a second. You faggots can drool over me because I'm so fucking hot. Yeah, I know. Yeah, this pot belly. Yeah, you think it came cheap? No, motherfuckers. It was some of the finest restaurants in the world that allowed me to have this pot belly. Yeah, and this double chin too. Anyway, Alejandro, are you there? Alejandro.
Hello.
Oh, hi. How's it going?
Hey, good. And you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. So you have a question. What is Vinny's question? And it's about fairness and power. Okay.
Yeah. So Vinny asked about alimony and child custody and if those were fair. And that made me think, well, then doesn't fairness depend on what can be enforced, what you can, what you have the power to enforce? Because right now, to us men, it would seem unfair, certainly, the whole alimony thing. But since it can
well, no, I mean, there are certain conditions, there are certain cases where alimony is unfair and certain cases where alimony is fair. Okay. But again, this is a subjective opinion. Fairness is a subjective opinion. It's never objective. Okay. Many of us, perhaps a majority of us, would think that men and women would think that one particular alimony agreement is very, very unfair, and another would be very fair. Okay, so you can't think of it like objectively, because that's what you're saying. You're basically saying that it's objective, that everybody thinks it's unfair. Okay, but right. Go on. You go on with your question.
The point of my question was more about how does fairness relate to the power to enforce what we think is fair?
It doesn't have anything to do with that. I mean, what are you talking about? I mean, be more precise in your question. What do you mean?
So, for example, the whole mess with Antifa, right? And and everything
No,
that's
no, no,
been
no,
going
no,
on.
no. Make it simple. A simple example. The two pancakes situation is really simple. So why don't you use that hypothetical? You know, it's two siblings and parents, right? And you define the number of pancakes that is allotted, and you tell me what you mean using that hypothetical.
Right. So the power differential between you and your sibling is one thing, but then there's your parents, and your guilt in part stems from
Wait.
your parents' power.
Why is there a power imbalance between the siblings?
I mean, I'm assuming like, you could
You're
just
assuming it.
take more Yeah, you're right. But say I could take more pancakes, right? And part of your point was, well, if I took more pancakes and it was unfair, and
I'm
then
not saying
I
you
might feel
took more
guilty.
pancakes. No. I'm just
No,
saying.
I'm
I've
saying
just
as a
posited.
hypothetical.
Yeah, I'm positing one has pancakes and the other doesn't, or one has a lot more than the other, or whatever. But it's
Right.
not that they took it. That's not the issue. The issue is the snapshot, irrespective of how the pancakes arrived on the plates of the two siblings. Okay, so go back to your thing. You're asking. I don't understand this
see it
issue
now.
of enforceability. What do you mean by enforceability?
I mean, say I believe something is unfair,
Yeah.
but I have no power to act on it. Doesn't
Yes,
even matter.
that creates resentment.
Yeah, but other than my resentment, unless I have the power to act on my resentment, it doesn't have any bearing on, let's say, the broader social sphere.
Because resentment comes from the fact that a situation is unfair and you cannot resolve it. Okay? Because this issue of power and force has nothing to do with it. Okay? Hang on a second. My seat keeps sliding down, as you can see. I keep trying to fix the fucking thing. I got to get a new seat, a new chair. But anyway, the issue of enforceability and power, that's that doesn't apply here. That's not the issue. Okay? The issue is whether a situation is fair or unfair. Okay? Let me give you the example again with the pancakes, right? I've got two pancakes. My little brother has 0. Okay? And my little brother complains it's unfair that, CRP has 2 pancakes and I don't have any. And one of our parents, comes and smacks me upside the head and says, CRP, give little CRP, one of your pancakes, right? And I'm like, okay, and I give it, okay? So what's the issue of enforceability? It doesn't...
Well, your parent there is enforcing their power on you to have you share.
Yeah, so?
So then what you're saying is that the power part isn't moral. The moral thing is the fairness of the, let's call it, pancake distribution.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Power is not at play here. Okay.
Well, it's what gets you to act morally in that example.
Yeah, but it could be not just power, but it could also be passive aggressiveness, for instance. Suppose, okay, that I'm there not with my parents, but with my great-grandfather. Okay. My great-grandfather, who is sitting in a wheelchair, and he's a weakling, okay? He's an old man, okay? And he can barely stand up, right? And I have 2 pancakes, and my sibling has 0. And my sibling says, this is unfair, And I'm like, fuck you, yeah? Life's unfair, get a helmet. And my great-grandfather, who has no power whatsoever, he just says to me, oh, CRP. And I just look at him and I feel guilty, and I give my little brother the pancake. And so what do you call that kind of passive-aggressive power? Do you call it passive-aggressive power? Does it matter? Because ultimately, it's not an issue of power. It's an issue of social pressure. Okay?
Right. I mean, that social pressure, it has power over you because you've internalized things about the society, but that kind of goes beyond.
No. It's not like you've internalized stuff about the society. This is just gobbledygook bullshit. It goes to the issue that you cannot survive without the collective. Because what you just said there, it internalizes the social norms or whatever the fuck you're saying.
Yeah, it's a matter of cooperation. you're trying to optimize cooperation. That's why fairness could be considered an evolutionary adaptation.
It is an evolution. It is an evolutionary adaptation. Or let me phrase it. No, altruism, selflessness, charity. Those are evolutionary adaptations to prevent against the guilt of acting unfairly, because it all stems from the fear of being left out of the group. The group has greater power than the individual by definition. Okay. No individual can have more power than the society that he belongs to, by definition, right?
Right. So morality can be objectivized as that which optimizes cooperation.
Morality can be objectified as that which maximizes cooperation.
Optimizes, not maximizes, but yeah. For this purpose.
Yeah, that's what I would say. Morality can be.
You've said that there's no way to make it objective.
No, that's not it. No, because there will be instances where it would be perfectly moral for the person to not optimize the collective. Hello?
Yeah. I'm thinking about it because it makes sense, but that wasn't entirely my point.
Because
right?
the original issue is there is the tension between the collective well-being and the individual self-actualization. The individual self-actualization will lead to disparate resource allocations between that individual and the other members of the society.
Yeah, it's a balance. You're thinking about it in the context of one game, but cooperation is across the set of all possible games. If you know, game theory and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, what's your point?
That even though, say, in one instance, we do not optimize cooperation, the whole moral structure goes for the set of all possible cooperations. We're kind of looking into the future. That's why we can do, it's unfair for you now, and tomorrow it's unfair for me kind of deals, right? Where I loosen something and you loosen something, but I win something else and you win something else, and our deals can be more nuanced because we're not just looking at right now, we're looking at a set.
Okay, so what's your point?
Just what I was saying before, that I still do think it is about optimizing, not maximizing cooperation. It's just much more nuanced.
It's not about optimizing cooperation. And I never said maximize. You did.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood them.
Yeah. No, it's not about optimizing cooperation. It's about balancing the need to cooperate and individual ambition. So that's what it is.
But aren't they both dependent on each other? That is to say, if I have no individual ambition, then there's nothing to cooperate for. And if there's no context for cooperation, most of my ambitions are kind of lost.
Yeah, that's why it's a balancing act.
Okay, I see it. I guess I'm going to have to think of cooperation differently and kind of chew that through, but probably other people have.
Because I'm not understanding, because first of all, you have not defined any objection. So I'm genuinely interested in what objection you have. The issue of power and enforceability, that kind of language, just like I'm not going down that rabbit hole, because that's not the issue. It's an issue.
You made your point clear on that one.
Yeah, and so and here you're talking about optimizing cooperation as objective morality. No, it's an issue that there are two disparate desires among every individual. The individual, on the one hand, wants to be selfish and improve their situation, and yet at the same time, they want to remain under the umbrella of collective security. And they recognize that in order to remain under that umbrella of collective security, they have to cede to the other members of the group. by definition. Okay. And so that's the whole issue of fairness. And so every moral, what I'm arguing is that every moral system is basically trying to answer the issue of what is fair. But there is never one answer to what is fair. And it's impossible to create some sort of algorithm that would answer that.
Well, it's not random stochastic, but it's random. What will be felt as fair, right? Because
Yeah,
it doesn't
sure.
matter what I think. It's
Yeah,
what other
sure.
people
I
think
mean,
is fair.
like for instance, going back to the extreme case of randomly murdering somebody on the street, right, with no provocation. Okay, there's no self-defense, none of that shit. It's just a random murder for no reason whatsoever. The vast majority would say that that's unfair. Yeah, taking the life of somebody at random like that. The vast majority, we could even argue that the 100% of the people would agree that that's unfair. Okay, and should not be tolerated as a society, right? But even forget about that. We just say that it's unfair. But how can I put it? The number of such extreme cases is minuscule. Okay, so to claim that you can say that there are enough situations where you can define it so you can slice the issue so thin that you can eventually reach a solution to every moral dilemma where 100% of people think it's fair, that's impossible. Because there's always going to be at least one person who thinks that it's unfair.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was just thinking more of moral decision making. That is to say, not that we all agree on what is moral, but what I, as a particular agent, can infer that other people might think is fair.
Yeah, because
right. We cannot get together and just say, okay, this is fair, this is not fair. That's the problem. One of the problems with roles, for example.
Yeah.
Right. That things are just not that simple. But
No.
then it falls upon me as an individual to try to infer what you as an individual, for example, would think is fair or not fair in a given interaction.
Right.
So that's where I say it can be objectivized because, well, there's
you're trying to make objective that which is that I've pretty much proven you cannot make it objective because there is the determining element of irrationality to it. Look at the very fact that
it's randomness.
It's not quite randomness, but let's leave it at random for the time being. But the very point that you say that we can empathize, or what I said that you can empathize with other. You used a different term. You didn't call it empathy. You called it something else.
Inference.
It was a different word that you used. Synonym of empathy. But okay, we'll leave it at that for now. You can empathize with somebody else and put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and believe that your actions are unfair, but they don't think so. Okay? And so that's sort of like, and there can be instances where you put yourself deliberately in the shoes of somebody else and decide, oh yeah, this is fair, but they don't consider it fair. See? There is no way for you to consistently and 100% put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and accurately predict what they consider to be fair or unfair.
I agree. That's why I'm talking about inference.
What kind of inference? There are three kinds of inferences.
Statistical inference.
Oh, okay. What kind of statistical inference are you driving at?
I'm saying it in the sense that, for example, you and I have a set of interactions, right? Mm-hmm. And in that set of interactions, I build a model of what I think.
No. Okay, because what happens is that you can never have because you're basically arguing that every interaction is fungible. Every moral interaction is fungible. It's not, because every moral interaction is affected by so many elements irrationally and fortuitously affected by other factors that for all intents and purposes, it is random. It is random whereby somebody will think something is fair or unfair.
Right, because maybe, I don't know, I'm in a bad mood or something else happened to me And so
Okay.
I think a situation that I wouldn't normally think is unfair is unfair. Okay, I can see it.
Yeah, because like for instance, the two siblings and the 5 pancakes and 2 pancakes. One morning, one brother has 5 and the other has 2, and the one who has 2 thinks it's fair. And then the next day, the exact same situation, the little brother thinks that it's unfair, even though he still can't finish off the second pancake. It's irrational. And it is affected by so many factors that to be able to predict it. And you could say that, okay, we can statistically, maybe probabilistically come up with, more likelihood than not that people will consider it fair.
Right, I'm not talking about prediction. I'm
Mhm.
talking about understanding it as a system, right? Say a chaotic system. I love those because
Yeah,
cannot
but
actually
you love it, but how does it apply to this?
it's a good example, right? Because you can give me even the underlying equations of the system.
Mhm.
But if you tell me, say, what is state 20 of this system,
Yeah,
the only way for me to know that state is to run it from the beginning, right? I cannot know what that state will be unless the whole thing plays out.
Okay, but
But that
Alejandro,
does not mean
Alejandro,
it's not deterministic.
I'm looking at this conversation that we're having, and I don't see where we're going. What point
Right.
are you trying to make?
Basically, right now, I think I've already made my point, and now I have to think about what you said.
What is your point? Because I didn't get it.
That I think it can be understood in objective terms from evolution, randomness. and all
Wait.
these
What
things.
can be understood in objective terms?
Your theory of morality.
Yeah, the theory can be my particular theory can be understood objectively as to whether it's correct or not, like an either or proposition that objectively it's correct or objectively it's incorrect.
No, I mean, sorry, the evaluation of moral situations.
No,
I mean, I think there can be a
never,
model.
no that
But there's no certainty. That's the thing. There's no certainty.
yeah,
But
exactly.
that's why I have to chew over what we talked just now.
No, because whether this theory that I've expounded is objectively accurate or not, I think it is, and I think that it can be evaluated as to whether it's objectively accurate or not. As to any moral situation of somebody considering something unfair or fair, that's part of this theory says that no, that's going to be random or essentially random, or it could be probabilistic, but there will be a large element of randomness to it because it will depend on so many factors that as a practical matter, it will be impossible to predict whether somebody considers any specific situation fair or unfair. Okay. But that's
right. But
not what
for
I'm
example,
interested
if the case were extreme enough, then there would be no social cohesion. So there has to be a degree of predictability, a certain distribution.
Sure. And,
So
and
that
I
there
would
can be
argue that the laws that are generally agreed upon are those moral issues that there is general consensus to better than 80-90%. Okay. Again, like the law against murder or the law against theft, and we're all in agreement. Okay. And so in those situations that are imminently predictable, okay, those eminently predictable situations are usually codified as laws. But the problem is that the interactions between people are so voluminous that they can't be predicted. Okay,
Right.
because
Law
the law
cannot codify nuance.
Yeah, because the law is essentially what is it? It's a tool for prediction. It's basically saying if this happens, then this. Okay, with the expectation that the first thing, if X happens, then Y, that X will happen at some point in the future. It's predicting that, right? But there are so many moral situations that cannot be predicted. And ultimately, it's the issue of fairness. And ultimately, it's an issue of what the majority of people in the given society believe is fair. When I started off with the hypothetical of not hypothetical, the actuality that the Aztecs, sacrificed their prisoners of war on their altar and chopped up the victims into little pieces, and they thought that was A-okay, if not something to celebrate. Well, and we would consider that horrifying. Well, that gives an example of that which is unfair versus that which is fair, and it's just subjective. Yeah.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Subjective does not mean non-deterministic, right? Unpredictable does not mean non-deterministic. but that's kind of something that, after all we've said, I really need to think about, because it would be unfair, given that there's other people asking questions.
No,
I feel like I've hogged way too much.
No, I'm interested in I'm interested in understanding where you're coming from and what your objection is. And I will confess, I still don't understand what thing. I'm interested in you saying, look, CRP, I think that you're wrong on this issue for these reasons.
Yeah, what I say is, I like your system, but I don't think it isn't, let's say, formalizable, or even kind of that it cannot be made objective.
But what cannot be made objective? A moral system?
Ethical decision making.
No, it's because ethical decision making cannot be objectively made. Period. It's all bullshit. That's what I'm arguing.
Objective does not mean infallible. That's the thing.
No,
I'm not saying
by definition it would mean to be infallible.
No, objective
Yes.
does not mean infallible.
Okay,
That's the whole point of, a probability theory and chaos theory. It's that there is a high degree of uncertainty in things, right? But that does not mean that the system is not deterministic. In a way, I don't want to say you're arguing for complete free will, but there has to be some mechanism of inference. I think it's intelligence, for us to, say, get to know each other, just in a broad way of speaking, such that I can tell with a degree of accuracy that allows us to interact through time what may or may not bother you and what will not destroy our relationship. That can be extrapolated into a broader sphere. That means we are making inferences, and therefore there is a system by which we understand each other. That does not mean it's easily formalizable, right?
Empathy. It's empathy.
So it is, in a way, quantifiable, in our brains at least. That does not mean we can easily put it into words, right? But there's a reason, for example, why you have so many fields of mathematics dealing with, for example, differential equations with probability, right? You have always a core of uncertainty. Things aren't always as they seem, but that does not mean that they are completely irrational or unpredictable.
Okay,
that's my objection.
Because they are irrational and unpredictable. All moral systems are ultimately irrational and unpredictable.
Right, but what you're saying is that they're predictable enough not to destroy cohesion.
No, I'm saying that at the time that they are predictable enough by the members of the social group to be predictable and not destroy cohesion, so long as fairness is applied at a general level. Okay, at a general level means, like, I don't know if you want to quantify it, like 80% of the time, right? But if there's a substantial unfairness factor in the society that creates resentment, then that resentment will break the social cohesion of the group, and that will be the end of the group. Like what's happening now in the United States, for instance.
Yeah, it's the problem with multiculturalism too.
What's happening in the United States? Yeah, and the thing is, see, multiculturalism, by this theory that I've expounded, because multiculturalism prioritizes the self-identification of different groups that have different moral frameworks as to what is fair and unfair, it inevitably creates resentment that will inevitably lead to the breakup of the multicultural society. It's not multiculturalism or strength. This moral theory that I'm arguing directly leads to the destruction of the multicultural state. Okay, multiculturalism is the end. Okay, because everybody has different notions of what is fair. Okay, different notions that are radical enough from one another that they can't live together because they only create resentment. See?
Yeah, I see it now. I'm gonna have to chew on this.
Yeah.
Just kind of think the whole thing through.
Hang on just a second. I gotta write some stuff down here. Yeah. I ultimately this whole theory, for me, the end thing is to understand the politics of resentment. Resentment is the thing that I'm curious about, because I personally don't feel resentment towards others, and so that's why I'm so curious about it. But anyway, yes, we've gone on quite a bit.
That's very Nietzschean, by the way. Go for Nietzsche on resentment, because that's something he talks about.
Be that as it may, Alejandro, it's great talking to you. And
thank you so much.
No, thank you. It's great.
And I'm sorry to everyone.
No,
I'm sorry
it's perfectly fine. It was fun for me, and I hope for everybody else. Take it easy, man. Catch you next week. Question for CRP. You've recently, oh, come on, man. You've recently covered political landscape in the US in some videos, and the very communist aspect that has crept into, okay, this guy, G. Let me get to G. Oh man, my eyes are going, man. Oh man, you've got a, G, you've got a cell phone, so I can't unmute you and bring you on. So, oh, G is Jeff. So I'll read his question. G, Jeff says, you've recently covered the political landscape in the US in some of your videos, and the very communist aspect that has crept into the Democratic Party. Love those videos. Any idea on why this theory of morality is overlooked by communist type thinkers? Well, first of all, this theory of morality is like an original theory, so they have no idea it exists. Are they mistakenly seeing themselves as highly moral? Yeah, they are. They think that they are fighting unfairness. See? Because, I mean, if you think of the fairness issue, who is a moral person? A person who is fighting unfairness. And there are two possibilities, of course. A person who is always fair would be a moral person. Or, of course, which is easier, a person who is actively fighting against a perceived or actual unfairness. Well, perceived or actual, that's a misnomer, because they are all perceived unfairnesses, okay? Whether it is an actual unfairness, objectively unfair. I think I'm understanding Alejandro's not objection, but point. See, unfairness is always subjective. Even if a vast majority, or indeed every single person on the planet, would agree that something is unjust, but ultimately I'm arguing that every unfairness is subjective. It's subjective because what you consider unfair is a harm or a perceived harm that you are experiencing. Because I mean, harm is objective, okay? I mean, like a hole in my hand or a broken wrist, that's an objective harm, right? But the sense of unfairness is subjective, and i.e. can never be truly objective. You can have the vast majority, if not everyone on the planet, agreeing that something is unfair, right? But it's subjective. But a harm is objective, okay? And I'm not talking about the wishy-washy emotional harm bullshit, which is unquantifiable. That is subjective. But like a broken arm, a hole in your head, whatnot, that's an objective harm, okay? And I lost the track of what I was trying to say. Yeah, so what's happening is that the communists in the Democratic Party, who've taken it over, I mean, look at Biden's policies over the last few days, right? Jesus Christ, man. And everybody's like regretting having voted for Biden. Ha ha. Anyway, the people who see themselves as highly moral, they are fighting unfairness. They are fighting to undo harms that they perceive. These harms may be true or no. The harms could well be factual, though the causes of those harms might be irrational or incorrect, okay? I mean, like, for instance, you could say that, like, the leftists think that the reason that, say, Latinos are doing poorly is because of inherent racism, and me as a Latino can say, no, it's because, most Latinos are lazy bums. I would know because I'm a lazy bum, and most Latinos that I know are lazy bums, and therefore it has nothing to do with systemic racism. But you see, the fact that Latinos are performing socioeconomically more poorly than other demographics, that's objective, but the explanation could be erroneous, okay? But anyway, going back to your question, are they mistakenly seeing themselves as highly moral? Yeah, it's again, the word mistakenly implies that it's objective. Okay? See, because they are saying, are they mistakenly seeing themselves as highly moral? That means, that implies in your question that they are incorrect to think that they are highly moral. But again, going back to the issue of what is morality, it's an issue of fairness. See? So and fairness is irrational. So it's not that they mistakenly see themselves as highly moral. You might think that they are mistaken in seeing themselves as highly moral. And I might agree with you, okay? But what's going on is that, see, they perceive themselves as highly moral, and it is impossible to know whether they are objectively that or not, because objectivity has nothing to do with it, because they are fighting on behalf of righting unfairness, and unfairness is always subjective. You see what I'm saying? Man, this is getting fucking tricky. This is interesting. I'm really, look, this might be really boring for a lot of you, okay? And I'm noticing that the viewer count is dropping. So, you know, maybe a lot of you find it really boring. I personally find it really, really interesting. And, oh, excuse me a moment. Hang on, my eyes are just like fried because I've been staring at the screen all day. Hang on a second. So Mobash, let me get Mobash on, because I really want to. Oh, Mobash, you're on a cell phone. Yeah, I'm so sorry to everybody who's on a cell phone. I had no idea that this platform does not allow questions from cell phone users. Okay, I generally like this platform. It seems to be very efficient and very easy to use, but I'm so sorry about this particular issue. I would ask you guys who use mobile and want to make questions, and I very much want to have you on. I'd appreciate you guys using a regular computer, laptop, or whatever. Mobash has a question. It is: the resentment of American business owners, those who value the Constitution and feel the election was stolen, that feel the lockdowns are used to control us for political gain, those who feel their rights, finances, physical and mental health, and potential their fertility are cast aside for the greed and power of politicians and vaccine and corporation, and the false sense of security given to their believers. Do you think this could be used to usher in a sense of morality that pushes collective freedom? Yes, this is a really good question, Mobash, because see, what's going on with all these people, these that you enumerate, the small business owners, people who are middle class, lower middle class, and lower class, whose jobs they can't go to, and therefore they have no money, and they're dependent on government largesse and whatnot. Those who are suffering mental health deterioration because of the lockdowns, those who might suffer potential infertility because of the vaccine. All of these people feel that what's going on is deeply unfair. Their focus of unfairness is different things, but they are all feeling that same feeling of resentfulness because their feelings of a situation being unfair are not being resolved. And this is a key issue insofar as resentment, that there has to be a sense that of resolution, that the unfairness is fixed somehow. But rather than it being fixed, more gasoline is being poured on the fire. And so this notion that there can be collective freedom, well, yeah, there is a sense that all of these individuals who want more individual rights, they can wind up banding together. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Vinny has a fair point. Oh, and Mr. Vinny split. Shit. That's I wish I had Mr. Vinny. I'm getting resentful listening to this argument. Okay. I saw it. In conclusion, race is real. Tribalism trumps individualism. Italo. I want to bring on Italo. And yeah, Italo. Are you there, Italo? Hello, Italo. Okay, on me, I'm going to have to, in the future, unmute people earlier so that they can get on. Italo, are you there? Hello, I unmuted you. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, how's it going?
Hello, really a pleasure to be here. Yeah, it's going good. Actually, I don't want to be rude, but I just have some minutes because I'm at work, but I always listen to you here every
Bad. You're goofing off at work. I'm
my
gonna
schedule doesn't work. It doesn't help.
yeah, I'm gonna call your boss. You're gonna be in big trouble. Okay.
Oh no, please.
So what's on your
But
mind?
I kind of have 10 minutes. Well, it's going good. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, it's going great. What's on your mind? What question do you have?
No, right now really nothing. I'm just hearing.
Oh, okay.
Really,
You
because
commented-
you know,
yeah, you
I
commented.
want to. It's interesting for me, you know, because you live in South America as me, and you see how multiracial society develops, and why. And people always see why this doesn't work, but it really has to be with tribalism in some way, you know. And I like
No. I mean, let me change that. It's not tribalism. It's what different groups of people consider fair and unfair. That's what's going on.
It comes from tribalism because every group looks for their own tribe in the end.
No, I would argue that it's more that people from similar backgrounds, irrespective of what that background is, tend to view things similarly insofar as what is fair and unfair.
Yeah, of course, it doesn't have to be like a racial thing. It can be a class thing.
Yes, exactly.
But in tribalism, when I mean tribalism, it can be in a broader sense, right? Not only about racial.
Yeah. But ultimately, the thing that would solve this problem, for instance, in the United States, was the notion of the Great American Melting Pot, of deliberately assimilating and submerging your tribal or ethnic identity into a new collective identity, which was the norm in the United States during the first 3 quarters of the 20th century. And it came about because of the huge influx of immigrants in the late 19th century into the United States in order to colonize such a vast country. And all of these new colonists from Europe, they had to be assimilated somehow, and this notion of the Great American Melting Pot was born. But starting in the 80s, there arose the issue of multiculturalism, which broke that and has created this individual tribalism. And that's why the Great American Melting Pot model worked for so long, because by assimilating, everybody had the same notions of fairness. But by having self-conscious, separate group identities, you know, the blacks, the Latinos, the Asians, the Jews, the gays, the women, that created different notions of what's fair and unfair. Consider, for instance, the issue of transgender athletes and feminists. Both consider it unfair. One considers it unfair for trans athletes to be competing against women, and the other group considers it unfair for trans women not to be allowed to compete with women. And so these clashing visions of fairness, right, creates resentfulness in the losing party. And this ultimately cleaves those two parties, makes them separate and go at war with one another. See? And that actually, that would actually be the simplest case, the most obvious case of how different groups have different notions of fairness, and this leads to resentment and social antagonism. That if those two were the only groups in that particular country, that country would go to civil war. Okay? And what I argue is, because of this moral theory, this gives an explanation as to why there will be a civil war in the United States. It gives a theoretical explanation as to why the civil war will arise. You see what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yes, totally true. Yes. It's very insightful to have this discussion apart from everything that you talked about before about politics, but also that human side of morality.
Yeah. And anyway, Idlo, how long have you been a member?
Since last year, I think.
Yeah.
Around March. Well, I was subscribed to you for 2 months, but I had some problems with my PayPal. But then after some months, I came back. Yeah, I've been hearing you quite a while. Yeah.
I really appreciate it. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that you feel that it's money well worth spent.
No, yeah, really, it's $10. Yeah, money is money, of course, but I think it's a great investment. Like,
Good. I'm glad. I mean, because that's the thing I'm most concerned about. See, I figure that the content I give, it has to be like the best I can give it. And that's why it's important that's why I'm asking you, because I want to make sure that you feel that it's money well worth spent. So yeah,
No,
I'm glad to
yeah,
hear that.
I think it is. Yeah, at first I watched your videos on YouTube. I found it in 2017, I think.
Uh-huh.
They were really good. I really like your content so much. I really learned about a lot. Yeah, and
I really appreciate
it's and this new level. Yeah, for me to be here. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I think it's very money and time well spent. Yeah.
Good.
And
Good.
Oh, yeah, your ideas. Maybe I'm now kind of attracted to Eastern Europe. I want to maybe try to live 1 or 2 years there.
Where are you, by the way? Where are you?
in Peru right now?
Where? I'm
Peru.
sorry, in Peru?
In Peru, in Lima. Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah, Lima's nice. I've been there a couple of times. Yeah, it's very, very nice. Great food. Great food, man.
Yeah, great food. Yeah, of course.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, it's crazy city. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And Idlo, thank you so much for being on, and I hope to see you next week. Okay?
Of course, yes. Best wishes, coach. Goodbye.
Take it easy. Bye. Branimir, let me find Branimir here. He's got a long question, and I'd like to bring him on. Branimir, are you there? Let me see. Branimir, I unmuted you, both your webcam and your microphone. So hop on. Are you there? Okay, let me read Branimir's question. He says, Nassim Taleb wrote in one of his books that capitalism is appropriate on large scale and socialism is appropriate on small scale, as in sub-city communities. Would you agree that this is fair? And if you do agree, where could the line be drawn that socialism is no longer appropriate and capitalistic principles should be applied? That's a really good question, Branimir. Okay, now, I don't know this, so I'll just take your word that Taleb wrote this, that capitalism works at large scale and socialism works on small scale, or is appropriate to small scale. Would I agree that this is fair? See, I think that socialism works when everyone has a personal relationship with one another. Now, anthropologists have made studies of human interactions, and Idlo, Branimir, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, yeah, you have
Figure
a
out the
really good
controls.
question. Yeah, it was a really good question. Yeah.
Thanks. I am a fan of Taleb, and I think you may have commented once or twice on him, but to me, this has been always like undefined. Where do we? I mean, socialism is great in a neighborhood, but it doesn't work on a country level.
Yeah.
And so, where do we draw the line?
Well, I think the line would be 150 people, and let me explain why. Anthropologists and psychologists have studied human brains, and it turns out that we have an upper limit as to how many human relationships we can keep track of, and it's roughly 150. For some people it's a few more, and for some people it's a few less. And by the way, it doesn't have to do with intelligence, with IQ points. It seems to be some other factors that I've forgotten, quite frankly. But the point is that around 150 is basically a number that we can know 150 people and know enough about their particular situation and who they are and whatnot to keep track of social interactions, okay? And they've done different studies, especially in systems management, where they've discovered that companies, factories that have 150 workers or less are more efficient than factories that have more than 150 workers. And so different clues have basically shown that 150 is like the upper number. And so it would seem that yes, on a small scale community, a community of less than 150 members, socialism would tend to work. But it seems what happens is that in a society where the number is greater than that, you are not going to know people. People will become anonymous. They will just become people that you don't know. You don't, because you can't know them, because your brain is not big enough to know who they are. Your upper limit is 150 people. That you can keep track of the relationships with 150 people. And therefore, it would seem that, yeah, that would make sense. But of course, the problem is, how do you break up the entire globe so that every community has 150 people or fewer, number one? And number two, what happens with those endeavors, those projects, those purposes that require more than 150 people, or whereby 150 people would not make it economically viable or practical? For example, a factory to build automobiles. You need 1,000 workers for that. I actually don't know. I'm just guessing. Say 1,000 workers, right? What community would be able to create a factory of 1,000 workers? It would be impossible. Because do keep in mind, when I say 150 people, I'm talking 150 men, women, and children, okay? That's the upper limit. And so it's an interesting thought experiment, but as a practical matter, it can never be applied. You could look at, for instance, people who are cast away on a desert island and they act in a socialistic way, in a collectivist way. Yeah, sure, because they're all under stress and it's a few number. It's maybe a dozen people. But in any kind of modern industrial society, it will automatically be more than 150 people, and therefore it will not work.
Well, I guess, I mean, that's interesting, really. Thank you. I never thought of actually a concrete number like that. And so thanks for bringing that up.
Sure.
The point about greater endeavors like building cars, I guess there would be really the common interest that binds people together. So even if they don't know each other personally, they could appreciate each other's skills for that particular endeavor, and maybe that would work. I mean,
well, yeah, hang on to that. It seems to me that what you would need is a common culture. A common culture whereby people who do not know each other, they all share similar cultural backgrounds, similar entertainments when they were children, similar music, similar books, similar everything, so that when they interact as adults, they can connect and find common ground even though they don't know each other. You see?
Well, so in discussing this, are we actually just trying to not lose the other guys? I am hoping that this is still kind of relevant to keeping with the morality, because would a community like a culture, you seem to say, that does not necessarily have the same morality?
A similar culture will probably bring up similar notions of what is fair and unfair. I mean,
Okay.
think of it like people from a similar cultural background, right? They will have a similar notion of what is fair and unfair. People from radically different cultural backgrounds will have very different notions of what is fair and unfair. And therefore, if groups of people have very different notions of what is fair and unfair, it will be inevitable that there will be resentment, because there will be mismatches of fairness. that is one person considering that the situation is fair, but the other considering that it's not fair. And therefore they will be at loggerheads and the resentment will build into antagonism. But people who have the same cultural baggage will have the same or very similar notions of what is fair and unfair. You see what I'm saying?
Yes,
And
yes, yes.
that gives
okay.
an explanation. That gives an explanation as to why a common culture is so essential, which is something I hadn't considered. Because the only way for people to have similar notions of what's fair and unfair is if they grew up and became adults under similar cultural conditions. That sounds about right, actually. I'm sorry, I'm working this out as we're talking.
Sure, yeah,
But
absolutely.
that sounds about right. Chat, what do you think? Do you think that it's on the money or not quite?
Thank you for bringing me in. I can skip on and you can bring somebody else on.
Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And Branimir, I hope you're enjoying the content on Patreon.
Definitely.
Yeah?
I definitely am, and I hope to be on for upcoming webinars.
Okay, great. Look forward to seeing you there. Take it easy.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye. Let me see. Chris O. I want to bring in Chris O. Chris O is he's the teacher's pet. He's a little SOB who always has like really good questions, and he's a really smart customer. But you know, teacher's pet. He's just a sucker. I'm teasing. Chris O is a great guy, and I hope he has his microphone and web camera plugged in. Chris, if you can hear me, I've allowed your webcam and microphone, and I'm waiting it for your end. So whenever you're ready, hop in. Can you? I can't hear you, Chris. I'm waiting for you to. Yeah, I don't hear you yet. Oh God, my eyes are just like fried. Givens is on a cell phone, but he has a question, and let me get to it. Oh, my eyes are just totally fried. Hang on. Givens says he has a comment. He says, and I would bring on Givens as well, but he's on a cell phone, unfortunately. I'm waiting for Chris O to get on. Chris, do whatever you can to get on. I'm looking forward to having you here and asking questions and commenting. Givens, though, says, I think the push towards tech is the catalyst to push large groups of people to work together in a quasi-communistic way where we all are in some hive mind entity. Chris, how's it going?
It's going well. Thank you for bringing me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you on. Look, this is what I'll do. Since you're on, Givens, I'll get to your question as soon as Chris and I have finished our conversation, because he's here and it would be rude of me to ignore him. Chris O, how's it going? So what's on your mind?
A number of questions arose while I was listening to the presentation, and I agree with your theory. It has a very strong explanatory value. I think we're starting to appreciate its predictive value, talking about the Civil War. But now we're talking about its prescriptive value. I mean, if we notice, for example, that multiculturalism leads to its own destruction because people with different moral systems will inevitably create so much resentment that the system will fall apart.
Yeah. No. What happens is that people with different moral systems living in the same social group, whether it be a family, a tribe, or a nation, that unit, whatsoever it may be, be it very small or very large, will break apart. Consider, for instance, a man and a woman who marry, but they have very different notions of what is fair and unfair. They'll eventually divorce, and just scale that up from the marriage to the tribe to the nation. And so it's different moral systems will break apart the social group that they belong to. Okay,
So you have an excellent example here. So let's say you have the men and women, they're married, father and mother, and they sit their child, for pancakes in the morning.
Yep.
And the mother says, everyone must have one pancake. That's
Yeah.
equality to me. And the father says, no, the kid can have half a pancake. I'll have 1.5 because I'm hungry and I'm the biggest one here, and you'll have one.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile that?
You can't.
So what do you do?
Well, what happens is that what has to happen is one participant or multiple participants in that interaction will feel that the situation is unfair. And so what would naturally occur is that in order to resolve this unfairness, they would have to discuss it and come to some sort of compromise so that everybody feels that perhaps they're not all getting their way, but at least everybody's sharing the pain equally. Okay? Because see, people are willing to accept a situation so long as everybody feels that they're sharing equally the burden. Okay, but what they're not willing to tolerate for long is a feeling of unfairness that is not resolved. Okay, because that just creates resentment, and resentment just inevitably leads to breaking up, of just not wanting to be associated with that party that they perceive to be as unfair.
But in that situation, what's the practical prescriptive solution here? I mean, if the mother is insistent on having one pancake because that's what she grew up with, and the father is insistent on having unequal number of pancake because that's what he grew up with, I mean, is divorce inevitable, or is resentment inevitable to last until that situation exists every time they have pancakes?
Well, of course, I mean, it would depend, because, like, for instance, just for the sake of argument, taking your hypothetical, the man and the woman have different views on pancake distribution.
Mm-hmm.
But say on everything else in their marriage, they're A-okay. I mean, morally, okay? Forget about the other stuff in the relationship. But in every other case of fairness, unfairness, they agree, okay? How to raise the children and all the rest of it. And so the issue of pancakes would be this incredibly annoying irritant that would not be deterministic. It would just be an annoyance, yeah? But if it were an example rather of multiple fairness disparities, fairness mismatches, then yes, of course, it would lead to a divorce. It could be the determining factor. It could be that there were so many other issues that were piling up, and finally the wife, over the stupid pancakes says, fuck it, this is unfair, I want a divorce, which happens all the time. A lot of times people explode at one another over seemingly trivial things, but it's really just the accumulation of other issues. So,
but what do you say about the formality education of the child? If the child notices the tension and the contradiction, mommy wants to give me one, the daddy wants to give me half. I see mommy's point of view, I see daddy's point of view. How does a child reconcile that?
I'm thinking. I don't know. That's a good question. How do you think that he would reconcile that moral difference, that difference in fairness?
Either the child would remain confused and go along with whoever has decisive power at that pancake phenomenon, or the child will develop dual morality of some sort.
Well, also there's the issue of empathy. Okay, I mean, to me, empathy is a key issue. Because empathy allows us to be in the shoes of the other and look at the world from their point of view and recognize if under our own sensibilities we feel that their situation is unfair or fair. So a child, for instance, in the situation where the two parents have different notions of the fair distribution of pancakes, the child could do the mental exercise of getting in the shoes of his father and getting in the shoes of his mother, and arriving at some conclusion that could be the mother's, the father's, or a third way. And whoever is the winner of the battle of fairness between the mother and the father, the child could have their own notion of what was truly fair. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I don't think that in the case of two people who have radically different notions of what is fair and unfair, the child of them would probably learn both. It's just like a child whose parents speak different languages would be able to learn both. But here's the issue. See, if a man and a woman have radically different notions of fairness, it's unlikely that they would be together. However, it is very possible and likely that different subgroups of people who are in the same nation because of circumstances, historical circumstances, could develop radically different notions of fairness. And therefore, the specific example of a family, it's less likely because a man and a woman are only going to be attracted to one another if they both feel that they have the same sort of moral outlook, the same notions of what is fair and unfair. I mean, that's perfectly natural. Like in your case, you're not going to marry a woman who has a radically different approach to pancake distribution than you do, right? And this applies, of course, to every other major important moral issue. But in the case of a nation, that's not clear. And in fact, we're seeing with multicultural nations that different groups have radically different notions of what is fair and unfair. And this leads to inevitable tensions and inevitable divorce. Yeah.
I mean, one could argue that one of the reasons for the wave of divorce these days is the fact that people treat marriage so lightly. They get married because they're hot for each other. The sex is good and short term. And when actually other things come into play, like children or decision making, they realize that, you know, that girl that's hot and gives me, you know, good sex, in fact, we don't share the same moral system. And that's when people split up. They get married for, you know, short term, in the bliss phase, based on sex and physical attraction. And then when moral systems come into play, they split.
I'm not sure I agree with that. On the personal level, because it seems to me that there are a lot of cases where people marriages do have identical moral frameworks, but what happens is that they split up anyway. My thinking has always been that a lot of contemporary marriages split apart because they don't have a common goal. See, it's not an issue of fairness or unfairness of moral systems, but rather the marriage breaks apart because they don't share the same goals in life. They don't have a single common purpose as a marriage. They don't have a common project. Because in any partnership, in order for the partnership to succeed, you need to have a common goal, a common vision that you want to achieve. I mean, think of it, you and a business partner. You guys set up a software company. He's great at coding and you're great at sales or whatever. I'm just making it up. And so you have different qualities that you bring together in a synergistic, in the hope for synergy, so that you will achieve the common goal of having a successful business that will provide you enough money and potentially make you rich, right?
Yeah.
That's the common goal. But in contemporary marriages, people have been encouraged to marry, quote unquote, the person that they love, which is, as you correctly point out, a lot of times just the person that you have a passing sexual interest in, or perhaps you have a personal affinity with, but not necessarily a common goal with, okay? And so I think it has to do with that, not necessarily having disparate moral frameworks, but rather, go ahead.
You focus on the goal, whereas I'm focusing on the means. Two people can have the same goal, raising a child together, but it means in terms of upbringing, moral systems, education. Let's say the father wants a child to be baptized, the mother says no.
Yeah,
They
well,
both want a child.
but then what would happen in that case, yeah, they might have the same goal of raising the right family, but then they have a different approach to what is fair and unfair, i.e. the process by, like you said, the process by which they educate that child. And so it does fall apart. Yeah, so I would say that you're right, but I guess what I'm arguing is that different moral frameworks are not exclusively the reason why marriages would fall apart. They could be one of the explanations, and it's not an even a necessary condition, because it could be that the parents share their moral framework to a T, but still the marriage falls apart because they don't have the common goal. See? So it's not even that it's a necessary condition, let alone a sufficient condition. You see?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think about the issue.
Thank you, Coach. I'll bow out now because there are a lot of people who want to ask questions. I'll just ask whether you will expand this prescriptive dimension of your theory. I mean, if you were to write it down, you have a good explanatory, you have a good predictive, but what a prescriptive? What should happen? What should individuals do? What should countries do? For example, a country should, make sure they have a melting pot. Otherwise, it's bound to.
Yeah, I think that what has to be enforced is a common cultural norm and an effort at assimilation, or else the nation is bound to fall apart. It's inevitable that it'll fall apart. And that strong cultural, I don't want to say cultural institutions, that's not right. A strong sense of common cultural narrative has to be inculcated by all the cultural players. There has to be a notion of this is our common culture and that we all partake in this common culture. And it's not just like paying attention to the shit that came from the past, but rather also paying attention to the new culture that arises, the new movies, the new novels, the new plays, the new whatever, new video games even. So that everybody has a common sense that informs their notions of fairness and unfairness. See?
And that's what seems to be disintegrating, especially in the last 12 months.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Coach.
No, thank you, Chris. Thanks. You're making me think a lot about this, of like, how to do it. The other obvious point, of course, is that in this argument is essentially saying that there is no such thing as good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's all just social construct, okay? And it's all attempts to rationalize and explain our subjective emotion, specifically the emotions of guilt and unfairness and resentment. That's the whole point of morality, to explain away these emotions. But ultimately, there is no such thing as good and evil. Yeah, that's what I'm basically saying here, okay? So, yeah, it's a pretty dark kind of theory if you think about it in those terms.
Okay. I've used up my 5 minutes. Thank you, Coach.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Take it easy, Chris. I hope to see you next week, man.
Always.
Russell says, lol, those pancakes. Let me see. How long are we going on? Oh, man, we're going 2 hours and 40 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to wind this down. Let me just tell you. What am I going to tell you here? This is a theory. Okay, and it's a lot to swallow because it's just a lot of stuff that I've been thinking about over a number of years. And perhaps it would be worthwhile, now that I've given you all that handout, perhaps at some future date to have like a follow-up with anybody who's interested, just to discuss this in more detail. Because I realize that perhaps I was unfair in flinging all of this at you, because it's a lot to digest. It's a lot to go over. I'm particularly disappointed in talking to Alejandro because he's a smart guy. He's a really sharp customer. And I just didn't understand his objection. But also I suspect that perhaps he has not had enough time to hone in on what he's really not happy about or clear about in this theory of morality, okay? And so it's not anybody's fault. It's just simply a function of needing more time to think this shit over. Because like I said, I sprung a lot on you guys, and I very much appreciate that so many of you stuck around to listen to it. And I very much appreciate Alejandro, whom I'm singling out, but I'm singling him out in a very positive way, please. It's because I'm really interested in you guys giving me more input on this. And so, now that I'm talking about this, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to set up for like during the week, like a follow-up webinar, quite apart from any other Sunday webinar, just to discuss this, because I'm really interested in your objections, most especially your objections, why you disagree with this, because I'm sure that you disagree with it. And I realize that thinking about it, I was sort of quote unquote unfair with you guys, because I obviously you need more time to think over what I've said. So I'd very much appreciate if you thought it over, look over that that handout I gave you, which has all the slides that I used in this presentation. And I'm going to schedule something for like, I don't know, maybe next Saturday when everybody would be freer, you know, more likely that they can hop on and talk about this stuff. And it'll be like a special episode just to discuss objections, criticisms, or if you want to ask me to clarify certain points, or, you know, whatever you want to talk about this. But I would prefer it if you were as harsh and critical as possible, because you see, I'm going to get around to writing this shit eventually, right? And so I far prefer to have you guys really tear it apart and get to where I made mistakes or where you disagree with good reasons, than to float this out there into the public world and then everybody's like, oh, this is bullshit because of these and those other reasons. You see what I'm saying? I much prefer for you guys in a control situation to tell me what's wrong with this so I can fix it. So yeah, and so here's an invitation to all of you who have stuck around so long. I very much appreciate it. I hope this doesn't bore you and it's giving you something to think about. And yeah, so this is CRP speaking to you live. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I will catch you next week.